on DAB and on the Talk Radio app. Talk Radio.
Offence archaeology on Twitter. Quite terrifying.
Don't beg Jeff Bezos. Charge him, for God's sake.
Have a day off. Use some common sense.
People can say whatever they want.
TV. Talk Radio TV. News.
Live at 10, I'm Sangeeta Candola. The government say the energy price cap will stay throughout the winter despite calls for it to be scrapped. Boris Johnson takes a break on the Costa del Sol. And the Gypsy King retains his crown after knocking out Deontay Wilder in Las Vegas. The Business Secretary says the energy price cap will stay in place throughout the winter and is convinced the UK won't suffer gas shortages in the months ahead. Kwasi Kwarteng called the cap the safety net, shielding customers from instant price hikes. He said keeping it is non-negotiable, despite suppliers calling for it to be scrapped. Gas prices are at record highs, with several energy companies collapsing. Energy regulator Ofgem has warned households will see significant rises in the spring when the cap is reviewed. Boris Johnson has flown to Marbella for a holiday after delivering his party conference speech this week. He's thought to be staying in a private villa on the Costa del Sol with his pregnant wife Carrie and their 17-month-old son. He's faced criticism as the break coincides with rising energy bills and supply chain issues. The Met Police have reportedly spoken to the woman who claims she was sexually assaulted by the Duke of York when she was 17. The Sunday Times says Scotland Yard officers have contacted Virginia Giuffre about her allegations, which Prince Andrew has always strenuously denied. The development could pave the way for the Met to open a criminal investigation into the claims. It follows Ms Giuffre's filing a civil lawsuit against Prince Andrew in New York. Chris Packham has vowed to continue fighting for animal rights despite arsonists targeting his home. The wildlife campaigner was home alone when two masked men drove up to his gate and set their vehicle on fire in the early hours of Friday morning.
If you think that by burning down those gates that I'm suddenly going to become a supporter of unsustainable or illegal shooting, the unwarranted savagery wrought upon foxes in our countryside when they're torn to pieces by dogs, then you're wrong.
And Tyson Fury has retained his WBC heavyweight crown after knocking out Deontay Wilder in Las Vegas. Despite being knocked down twice, the Gypsy King took Wilder out in the 11th round.
You know, when it comes down to it, when I have to pull the chips out every time, I've delivered 33 times in a row, and I never let anyone down. I always give it me all, 100% tonight. I came into this fight tonight thinking, You can only do your best in life, and whatever's meant to be, whatever's destined, written in the stars for you will be.
Your weather fine and dry with some sunny spells, feeling warm in the south. That's your live news on Talk Radio TV. More in half an hour.
Offence archaeology on Twitter. Quite terrifying.
Don't beg Jeff Bezos. Charge him, for God's sake.
Have a day off. Use some common sense.
People can say whatever they want.
This is Talk Radio.
Across the UK, online, on DAB+, and on the Talk Radio app.
This is Talk Radio.
Welcome, good morning. You're listening to Tice Talk. It's just after 10 o'clock here on Sunday, the 10th of October. And once again, as I look out across the city of London, I see grey skies and gloom as bad as the news in the newspapers this weekend. We've got an action-packed show. We've got in the second hour great chat with Alistair Campbell talking about what he would do in the current crisis. We've got Nick Buckley talking about the war on woke. And in the first hour, my big Sunday sermon, the big ethics. I want you to help the ethical discussion about the role of Big Pharma. All of that coming up. But of course, we need to remind ourselves who's in charge at the moment. We're not quite sure. The Prime Minister seems to have taken leave and he's off to the Costa del Sol. Who's he left in charge? Has he left Dominic Raab, the guy with an excellent track record after the Afghanistan crisis? Or is it Liz Truss? Who knows? The good news is that we've got a strong, robust grown-up back in charge of the armed forces with effect from the 30th of November. Yes, an Admiral, Sir Tony Radakin, has been appointed and he believes in projecting our strength across the high seas. Also, with the supply chain shortages, we've got the ex-Tesco's boss. Sir Dave Lewis has been put in charge of that because, of course, Grant Shapps and Kwasi Kwarteng have effectively failed. And then we need to talk about, later in the show, in the third hour, who's in charge of Newcastle United. It turns out it's the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia. We'll be talking about that. All of this, I want your input, your views, your thoughts. Call me 0344 or text us talk at 87222. Tweet us at Talk Radio, and of course, watch us live on TV. You can download the app, or you can watch on Apple TV, Samsung, Roku, Rakuten, YouTube. So many ways, there's no excuse. But I want your thoughts, your views. That's how we make a really great show. Don't hold back. You're listening to Tice Talk. It is 10:06, and this is, of course, the castle of common sense. It's Talk Radio.
Across the UK, online, on DAB, and on your smart speaker. This is Talk Radio.
Thanks for joining me this Sunday morning. And of course, it is time for my big Sunday sermon. As usual, every Sunday morning, I'll be giving a Sunday sermon. And for this one, I need your help. I really want you to get involved because I'm going to ask you to essentially play a role here with me. I want you to imagine that you're the boss. Yes, you're the boss of a big multinational company. It's a pharmaceutical company. You're the chief exec. You've been there a number of years, and things are going pretty well, actually. Particularly your bank balance. Yes, you've been earning a mere £15 million every single year in recent years. So things are going well for you. Things are going well for the company. You're pretty happy. And 15 million, that goes a long way. But then all of a sudden, something happens. There's a pandemic. A virus comes along. And of course, as a big pharmaceutical company, one of the biggest companies in the world, you want to try and find the vaccine. You want to try and find a treatment to help get through this crisis. And of course, you know that if you find a vaccine and develop a vaccine or a treatment, your company, then the payday is going to be humongous, not only for your pay packet, but also for the shareholders, the investors in that business. So you're investing hundreds of millions of dollars looking for a vaccine, looking for a treatment. You're buying up small companies that may have a vaccine potential. But unfortunately, things actually are not going quite so well. And for whatever reason, your own scientists in your own huge pharmaceutical company, they're not quite finding the right vaccine. They're just not nailing it. And annoyingly, some others are for other companies. And that means that other companies have got their vaccine approved. They've got their vaccine being literally injected into the arms of people all over the world. And you've been spending hundreds of millions of dollars trying to find your own vaccine. And then someone knocks on your door and says, boss, something's going on, boss. Do you remember that drug that we developed? Well, the company developed 40 years ago. Yes, the one that the company got a Nobel Peace Prize for. That's the one. We've sold there've been over 4 billion doses of it. Well, it's now out of patent. It's a generic. The pills are cheap as chips. It's sort of a few pence per pill. Well, apparently, boss, a number of countries are using this drug, potentially with other drugs, and they're using it. And it looks as though it may be helping to mitigate the effects of the virus. And so, as I say, a number of countries are using it, a number of states of countries, and there's a few small trials out there, boss, but the trials are a bit, you can criticise them, we're not quite sure. And so, boss, what we need to work out is, should we, the godfather of this drug, should we create the biggest, the most professional, the most sophisticated clinical trial of this drug? But you do understand, boss, don't you, that of course we're not going to earn out of this because it's out of patent, and therefore it's a bit of a dilemma, isn't it, boss? We've spent hundreds of millions of dollars on this new vaccine that we haven't yet developed, and we're still spending hundreds of millions of dollars trying to find a treatment, and we've got one treatment that looks as though it could be the business a bit later in the year. So boss, we need to make a decision. Do we order a clinical trial of the drug that is now out of patent that we originally developed to see whether actually it's true? It does work against the virus. It does help. And we need to know, the trial needs to work out what doses, at what stage, relative to the onset of symptoms of the virus. So do we do that, boss? Or do we say, no, let's just ignore it, pretend that it doesn't work, or say that it doesn't work, and carry on developing our own drug in the hope that it could be a massive, massive payday? It could be, if we get the treatment right, it could be a blockbuster. It could be one of the biggest paydays, one of the biggest profits. So I want you, dear listener, dear viewers, what would you do? Would you order the clinical trial, even though it may cost you money, personally and for the business? Or would you ignore it and just carry on developing the new treatment that could give the huge payday, the massive profits, the big bonus in your already bulging bank balance? What would you do? Call me, text me, tweet me, 0344 499 1000. This is the dilemma. You're the boss, you're the chief exec, you've got to make the decision. No one else is going to make it. What would you do? I want to hear your views, your thoughts. Because if actually you did this clinical trial and it turns out that it could help in dealing with the virus, it could actually literally save tens of thousands of lives, but it may mean much less profits or no profits relating to this virus for the business. What would you do? Would you order the trial or not? I genuinely think this is probably one of the biggest corporate ethical dilemmas that any chief executive of any business anywhere in the world has ever faced. And I have to now tell you, folks, that this is a real situation. This is a live story. The company in question is one of the biggest pharmaceutical companies in the world. It's called Merck, M-E-R-C-K. The drug in question that was out of patent, that is cheap as chips, is called ivermectin. And the new treatment drug that Merck are working on has literally, in the last week, they have just stopped their new trial early because of the huge success of the results. It looks as though it's going to be a superstar of a drug, and analysts say that they could be selling it for $700 a dose against a cost of just less than $20. So you can see this is potentially one of the biggest, most successful drugs in the world. What would you do? Would you have ordered the clinical trial, or would you have waited to develop the new drug? I think it's a huge question. It's a question that I wanted Merck to respond to. We've asked them 2 weeks ago, we asked them to come on my show, and this week we asked their US office, we asked their European offices, we sent emails, we phoned them, no reply. Interesting that, isn't it? What does that silence tell you about this big ethical decision? I want you to tell me, what would you have done? Would you have ordered the big clinical trials, or would you have waited and gone for the profits? 0344 499 1000. This was the Sunday sermon on Sunday the 10th of October, and you're listening to Tice Talk here on Talk Radio.
Online, on DAB, and on the Talk Radio app. Talk Radio.
Offence archaeology on Twitter. Quite terrifying.
Don't beg Jeff Bezos. Charge him, for God's sake.
Have a day off. Use some common sense.
People can say whatever they want.
This is Talk Radio.
Across the UK, online, on DAB+, and on the Talk Radio app.
This is Talk Radio.
Welcome back to Tice Talk here on Talk Radio this Sunday morning, and I've posed the big ethical dilemma, and I want your thoughts, your views. 0344 499 1000. If you were the boss of this huge pharmaceutical company, what would you have done back in February? Would you have ordered the biggest, most professional clinical trial of this drug, ivermectin, to find out whether it did or didn't have any beneficial impact on treating COVID, because there's lots of doubt about it? Or would you have just carried on in developing what could have been the blockbuster drug, the new treatment which has just passed its first trial, called Molyneux molnupiravir. And I've been a big fan on focusing on treatments. I've talked about it before on this show. You know, there's been so much focus on vaccines, but we now need, as we learn to live with this virus, to have confidence in the potential treatments. There was good news a few weeks ago about the other treatment, which has been approved by our own MHRA, called Ronapreve. And now there's this potential good news. It's not yet been approved by the US authorities, but it looks as though it's interesting. Molnupiravir, but it's expensive. Really, really expensive. And that means big profits for the pharmaceutical company. Well, I'm delighted to be joined now to talk about this new potential treatment by Dr. Peter English, who's a retired consultant on communicable diseases and the immediate past chair of the BMA Public Health Committee. Peter, very good morning. Thanks for joining us this Sunday.
Morning, Richard.
And it's really, I've been talking about treatments, potential treatments emerging. And, this does look, based on the initial trial evidence, it does look to be quite an exciting development from this big drug company, Merck. It's called molnupiravir. They never make these drugs easy to name. I don't know why, but anyway, I've been practicing it all morning. But you, Peter, you're quite familiar with how this drug works relative to other treatment drugs. And I just thought it'd be really interesting to hear your thoughts on its potential within the sort of family of treatments that are emerging.
Good morning, Richard. Yes, we've had antiviral drugs for 2 or 3 decades now, starting with acyclovir for herpes simplex, cold sores, for example. And we've, of course, had a lot of experience with antiviral drugs in flu, including around the pandemic 10 or 11 years ago. Then the health secretary at the time said that everybody with flu symptoms would have to get, must be given antivirals. The problem is that antivirals work, and we've seen this with all of the antivirals we've had so far, only if you give them within the first 48 hours or so after symptoms start. And very often, by the time you get the drugs to the people, by the time they've identified themselves as having symptoms and come forward, it's too late for the drugs to make much difference. The studies on molnupiravir have appeared only as a press release so far. We haven't seen much detail. It talks about people getting the drugs within 5 days of onset of symptoms. I'd be very interested to see the detail, because I would be somewhat surprised if the drug was still as effective in people who get it on day 4 or 5 as those who get it on day 1 and 2.
Right. So essentially, to administer the drug within literally 5 days of getting symptoms means that you've either got to have easy access to it, or it's almost got to be literally in your medicine cupboard, a bit like paracetamol or a plaster.
Yes. If it was so cheap that everybody could have it in their medicine cabinet, and so safe, because if you're going to give vast numbers of people drugs on spec, because you have to give it before you're certain that they've got COVID-19, at least that would be the most effective way of doing it. It's got to be incredibly safe. We talk about side effects from vaccines that happen in 1 in a million or 1 in more than a million people, and we worry about them. But with drugs, you tend to get higher rates of side effects than with vaccines. So it would have to be in a fantastically safe drug and be used early. To do that, it has to be cheap as chips. Which
is clearly not if they're charging, as I understand, they've got a contract with the US government if it gets approved, but it's about $700 a dose, which by nobody's stretch of the imagination could be called cheap.
Well, drug companies need to cover their development costs. They're not charities doing the development for nothing. They have to pay back the investment that they've spent. And there are 2 ways of doing that. You can sell a relatively small amount at a high price, or a large amount of it at a much lower price. So that's a possibility that might be considered. My suspicion is that we won't ever attempt to give it wide scale to the population at large, but we will identify people very much as we do with flu. We give chemoprophylaxis antiviral drugs, that is, for flu. When there's a case of flu in a nursing home, we give it to everybody, because it's not only giving them the drug treatment before they develop symptoms that way, which is the way it's most effective.
Yes.
But it's also very effective at reducing onward transmission. It cuts down the amount of virus in their respiratory droplets. It cuts down the duration of virus production. So if you get flu, having had an antiviral, you're much less infectious to others, as well as much less likely to be sick if you get it very early in the condition.
So if this treatment is approved by the US authorities and then by the UK authorities, I think what you're saying is you could focus it around those who are identified as essentially needing the most protection, the most vulnerable, be they suffering from immunosuppression or be they elderly in care homes and things. So you could focus it around that. Is that right? Yes.
Part of the reason why we give treatment in care homes for flu is because they're a very good environment for spreading it. People, it tends to spread in care homes where people have contact. So it's an institutional setting where people are likely to transmit. The same might well apply to COVID-19 treatments.
And after the 5 days, what happens? Why does it reduce effectiveness after 5 days, and how quickly?
Well, we know with the treatments for flu, the main effect, if you give it to people who are already symptomatic, is to reduce the duration of symptoms by about half a day. They really aren't terribly effective. You need to give it earlier than that. And we know that with COVID-19 in particular, the severe forms of COVID-19 happen after you've cleared the virus. They're to do with the way that your immune response is overreacting, having been triggered by the virus. But at the time you go into hospital, the virus is gone. Treating the virus isn't going to make any difference. Antivirals, monoclonal antibodies to kill off the virus, it's too late. By then, it's no longer a viral illness. It's an immune disease triggered by the virus.
So essentially, at that point, if you're really suffering, then actually you would need a different type of treatment, and that then this isn't the wonder drug if the virus has got you at that stage.
At that point, you need the dexamethasone, which came up from the earlier trials. You need the treatments that control the over-response of the immune system.
Right.
And that's at that point in the disease, that's what's needed. And of course, supportive treatment with oxygen and so on.
Indeed. And then just moving on to ivermectin, Peter, that, as I understand, is that's undergoing a trial at the Oxford Principal Trials. And they're due to produce some interim results, I understand, November time, so not that far away. Have you heard anything about what they're expecting? Is that a sort of going to be a definitive result or an interim result? What are you hearing on the grapevine?
I haven't heard anything about that, and one wouldn't expect to. The results shouldn't be available even to the investigators until they unblind the samples. That's the way you do it. You do it double blind, so nobody knows who's had the treatment and who's had the placebo until a certain point when you're unblind to see what's going on. As my suspicion is that ivermectin is going to be totally useless and has been throughout, and there's been no decent evidence whatsoever suggesting that it is. There have been studies, but they've been poor and small and of poor quality. So ivermectin, I think, is dead in the water.
I mean, that's an interesting view, because there are lots of people, anecdotally and with the small studies, and some states, and particularly in India and places that are essentially very pro it, and so it will be very interesting to see the result of that studies. I don't know whether it works or not. It's interesting reading the anecdotal evidence and seeing whether or not that's a coincidence, wishful thinking, or whatever.
I think it is wishful thinking. No, it would be great if it did work. Some states, I heard, because it's so very cheap, not all that safe, but it's very cheap, you can give it out to a large number of people in almost a preventive way, which I think has happened in some Indian states, and I have heard that proposed. But it's not a completely safe drug. We used to not use it in treating scabies in care homes because we were concerned about the effect it might have on people's livers and things in that age group. Since then, things have moved on, and we think it's safer, and it is now widely used as a first-line treatment for scabies in care homes.
And as an antiparasitic drug in developing nations, isn't it? I mean, it's one of the WHO essential medicines.
And it kills insects.
And my ethical question to listeners and viewers is, I just find it surprising that Merck didn't order a proper, full-blown professional clinical trial of ivermectin, essentially to try and sort of establish one way or the other, rather than the continuing discussion and stories one way or the other.
Yes, to settle the issue. I know that it did have some obviously very high-profile protagonists, not least the then President of the United States. However, so it would have been useful to be able to say for certain
Yes.
whether it worked or not. And no, we've had these half-hearted studies which have given some succor to people who believe in it, but really aren't good enough quality to give any credence to.
It's finding the the big trial that gives more evidence, more confidence. Peter, thank you so much for joining us with those thoughts on this new potential treatment that has produced some good results in its early trials by the drug company Merck. It's called Molnupiravir. It's one to watch. Thank you very much. That was Peter English, a retired consultant on communicable diseases. And give me your thoughts on this and how you would have responded if you were the boss of this drug company, Merck. Would you have ordered a professional big clinical trial to establish the truth on this out-of-patent drug, ivermectin, or would you have just ploughed on? And we've got some tweets, interesting tweets coming in. We've got one here from Willie who says that no CEO would put ethics before profits. That's interesting. I wonder. I'm not so sure. I think many would. I'd hope they would. But that's Will's view. And then there's another one here, which just come in. From the beginning, scientists, doctors have been recommending this drug. No need for a clinical trial. That's from Phyllis. Well, I think you do need clinical trials. We do need to know what the evidence is. And I think it's a shame that Merck didn't order this clinical trial at the beginning of the year. It could have, resolved this one way or the other. And if it did have some benefit at some point in the process, in the cycle of the disease, then it could potentially have saved lives. Give me a call, your views, 0344 499 1000. You're listening to Tice Talk. The time is just approaching 10:30, and this is, of course, the home of common sense. It is Talk Radio.
Online and on your smart TV. Talk Radio TV News.
Here are your headlines. I'm Sangeeta Kandola. The government say the energy price cap will stay throughout the winter, despite calls for it to be scrapped. Boris Johnson takes a break on the Costa del Sol. And the Gypsy King keeps hold of his crown after knocking out Deontay Wilder in Las Vegas. The business secretary says the energy price cap will stay in place throughout the winter, despite suppliers calling for it to be scrapped. Kwasi Kwarteng called the cap the safety net, shielding customers from instant price hikes, and said keeping it is non-negotiable. Gas prices are at record highs, with several energy companies collapsing in recent months. Energy regulator Ofgem has warned households will see significant rises in the spring when the cap is reviewed. Boris Johnson has flown to Marbella for a holiday after delivering his party conference speech this week. It's reported he's staying in a private villa on the Costa del Sol with his pregnant wife Carrie and their 17-month-old son. He's faced criticism as the break coincides with soaring energy bills and supply chain disruptions. Chris Packham has vowed to continue fighting for animal rights, despite arsonists targeting his home. The wildlife campaigner was home alone when two masked and hooded men drove up to his gate and set their vehicle on fire in the early hours of Friday morning. And Tyson Fury has retained his WBC heavyweight crown after knocking out Deontay Wilder in Las Vegas. In a breathtaking match, the Gypsy King came back from 2 knockdowns before eventually taking out Wilder in the 11th round as the rivals met for their long-awaited trilogy bout. Fury later tweeted, "Don't ever doubt me. When the chips are down, I always deliver." That's your news on Talk Radio TV. More in half an hour.
This is Talk Radio.
Across the UK, online, on DAB+, and on the Talk Radio app.
This is Talk Radio.
Welcome back to Tice Talk this Sunday morning. It's 10:33. We've been talking about the potential new treatment from the drug company Merck and the big ethical dilemma. Why didn't they do a clinical trial at the beginning of this year on the drug ivermectin? I want your thoughts, your views, calls coming in, tweets coming in, getting people going. Into the second hour, just after 11 o'clock, I've got Alistair Campbell on. That's upset some people already. James has said, sorry, can't listen if Campbell is on. Well, I think it is right to listen to views, different thoughts, different views and arguments, debates from other sides of the policy spectrum. That's why I've got him on just after 11 o'clock. Well, obviously, not only have we got COVID is ongoing, but we've got the issue of the lorry driver crisis, the energy crisis, the supply chain crisis, much of which, of course, not only is it across Europe, across the UK, but actually it's global. And much of it is centred around the issue of lorry drivers, where have they all gone? And I thought it would be really useful if we were actually to discuss with a former HGV driver his own experience as to why there has been a reduction in HGV drivers and the reasons behind it. So I'm delighted now to be joined by Richard Rees, as I say, a former HGV driver, for his thoughts on what's happened over the last 10 to 15 years to, what is actually a very, very quite high pressure, responsible job, driving an HGV truck, thundering down the motorway. I have to say, not something I could do. Richard, a very good morning to you. Thanks for joining this Sunday morning. So tell us, when were you a driver? How long were you a driver? And sort of, what do you think's happened over recent years that we've ended up with this situation?
I passed my HGV1 test back in 2006, which cost me about £2,000 for the two tests, because obviously I need to pass your class 2 first. And then I quickly got myself into a job that was paying me a basic of about £450 a week. With overtime and bonuses, I'd probably get up to about £600 to £800 a week, which really was in keeping with the responsibility that you have as an HGV driver. For example, you could have 26 pallets of mobile phones or cigarettes with you worth millions and millions of pounds, and obviously there's a responsibility that comes with that.
Sure. And so you did that for how long, Richard?
I did it for maybe a couple of years, until unfortunately the company that I was working for, their contract got replaced by a company that did it for less.
Sure, and I guess that's just sort of normal sort of competitive market practice. But
this was around the time when Polish immigration was quite high, and employers quickly worked out that Polish lorry drivers would happily work for the UK minimum wage, which at the time was considerably less than what HGV drivers were earning. Realistically, I think back in 2008-ish, the minimum wage was about £5.80 an hour, which would take the sort of money that I was earning down to about £230 a week.
So a massive reduction in your wages.
Now, I understand that there are obviously people that earn considerably less than this, but for someone who is used to an income like that, to take that kind of hit isn't realistic.
Sure, and so that essentially must have happened across the whole of the UK pretty rapidly.
I should imagine that employers would have caught on fairly quickly and would have been doing the same sort of practices, moving on long-served drivers with high pay and replacing them with lower-paid drivers, because it's cheaper.
And of course, it's not just the pay, was it? There's other issues in terms of investing in facilities, at service stations, at truck stops.
I won't say that the life of a lorry driver is glamorous. There's much sleeping in laybys and using bushes as toilets, which I suppose really was part and parcel of why you would be paid more than people would have before. It was a skilled manual job, and I was listening to the show before you, where it seems that people no longer think it is a skilled job.
Well, I mean, clearly it is, and I say it's a very responsible job, because if you get it slightly wrong and you're cruising down one of the lanes of a motorway, then the consequences of your mistakes could be catastrophic and life-changing.
Absolutely.
So, it's a very responsible job. And then there have been other changes more recently, haven't there, in terms of the terms and conditions with IR35, which has obviously also had a big impact.
That's not something I'm familiar with, obviously, as I've been out of driving for so long now, purely because the income wouldn't allow me to continue working. I had to retrain shortly after training to do the job.
Yes.
To start a new career.
That's right. Now, the IR35 is a recent change with HMRC, which again has actually had a depressing effect on lorry drivers' wages. And so, and do you also think that actually what's also happened with obviously far more, in a sense, sort of last mile type delivery, whether it's sort of Ocado or Tesco deliveries, Amazon and things, where actually, you're not driving an HGV, you're driving a much smaller lorry or van.
The difference between small van drivers and HGV drivers is that the HGV drivers bring things on en masse. So to the likes of the end user like you and me, we see the Amazon man turn up or the Tesco delivery driver, and he brings you what you've asked for, and that's great. But there needs to be tons and tons of that stuff for everybody up and down the country.
But of course, yes,
without lorries, you get nothing.
But the Amazon, the sort of the short haul driver gets to get home every night, see the family, see the wife, see the children, and that as a lifestyle is clearly more attractive than, as you said earlier, sleeping in the cab of the lorry.
I think really what it boils down to is the money. Before I came on here this morning, I've been looking at what jobs are locally available. Now there's a company advertising locally for a Class 1 driver at £10.41 an hour, and I can walk into my local Aldi up the road and get £10.57 apparently.
And Class 1 is HGV, just for my listeners.
Yeah, Class 1 is bendy lorries.
Yeah, which are not easy to drive. I mean, that is clear, and takes a great deal of skill and practice. I mean, that seems to me the proof's in the pudding. But I have heard rates, a lot higher than that, Richard. But
absolutely. But what the sort of economy and the market tends to do is race to the bottom. Whoever can do it for the least. People don't want to pay more for a premium product. They're quite happy to pay as little as possible and get the job done.
And in a sense, maybe that explains why those companies, they've still got vacancies for HGV drivers if they can't, if they're not going to pay a higher rate for it. There's no question there's a big sort of shift in the market, and that some companies, some of the big supermarket companies, they've been paying actual sort of golden hellos to attract people in order to secure it.
Recently a letter from the DVLA, from the Department of Transport, asking me to return to being a lorry driver.
Right, and were you tempted?
No.
Because of the pay or the conditions?
I mean, realistically, you can overcome the conditions if the pay is acceptable. But if I can get a local job at a supermarket stacking shelves, where I've not had to put thousands of pounds into it to obtain a license to do it, why would I go and be a lorry driver over going and working in the shop?
Exactly. That is the question to ask. And I think that, in a sense, what we've seen in recent weeks is we know the answer, is that many people are saying the pay doesn't reflect the additional responsibilities and challenges and risks.
Richard, I mean, if you were to be put in charge of millions of pounds worth of products and someone said, I'll give you just over £10 an hour to look after these on your own,
it's not tempting. I get that. Richard Rees, former HGV driver, thank you so much for coming on and those thoughts, which I think really encapsulates it. And I do think, and I've said it before, I think big businesses are having to adapt, are having to realise that HGV drivers, really have got to be properly paid to reflect the additional responsibilities relative to someone who's doing that type of last mile type delivery in much smaller lorries. And the pay rates have to reflect that difference. And it seems to me, from what we're hearing, that the demands from big business to open up visas to EU lorry drivers from the EU doesn't seem to be making any difference. Just a few applicants coming in their early hundreds, because guess what? There's a shortage of lorry drivers across the whole of Europe, and these people weren't exactly sitting on their backside waiting for the call from the UK. Well, give me your call on that or on the big ethical dilemma that I set this morning. 0344 499 1000. If you were the boss of Merck, if you were the boss of that big drugs company, would you have ordered clinical trials at the beginning of this year to establish whether or not ivermectin did or did not work, and if it did, at what dosages and at what onset of the symptoms of the virus? I want your thoughts, your views. Give us a call. The time is approaching 10:43. You're listening to Tice Talk here on Talk Radio.
Online, on DAB, and on the Talk Radio app. Talk Radio.
Offence archaeology on Twitter. Quite terrifying.
Don't beg Jeff Bezos. Charge him, for God's sake.
Have a day off. Use some common sense.
People can say whatever they want.
This is Talk Radio.
Across the UK, online, on DAB+, and on the Talk Radio app.
This is Talk Radio.
Welcome back to Tice Talk here on Talk Radio. It's 10:47 and we've been talking about the ethical questions surrounding ivermectin, clinical trials, and I think people are actually, judging by the tweets, happy that we're talking about this. James says, you've taken the bull by the horns, Richard, and thank you for that. You have my utmost respect. Others also with similar sorts of views. One here from Lucy. Obviously, it wouldn't do because Trump promoted that drug. Well, there's certainly lots of thoughts about it. Anxiety that the BBC produced some negative reports and studies about ivermectin over the last couple of days. We have to have a debate about this stuff. We have to look at the different views, the different analysis, and essentially come to a decision. But I just remind listeners, I wrote to the then Health Secretary back in March, Matt Hancock, to ask why the government hadn't instigated its own trials, its own clinical trials into ivermectin, and it took 3 months, yes, 3 months for his deputy, Lord Bethel, to reply to me saying they hadn't seen any evidence, to which the obvious point is, why didn't you do your own clinical trial? Anyway, it is now finally happening, and it'll be interesting to see what it says. Anyway, we've got some calls coming in. Do give us a call. Firstly, we've got Andy in Andover. Andy, how are you doing this morning?
Oh, good morning, Richard. How are you doing?
Fine, fine. What would you like to say this Sunday morning?
Well, I've heard some comments from that previous caller about truck driving. I'm a veteran of truck driving for over 32 years. I've driven in the UK, I've driven in Europe, and I've also driven in North America for 5 years, in Canada and the US.
You've been around a bit then, driving.
I've driven for a long time, and I hate my job with a passion every single moment of the day. And I actually work for a very good company now. Now, some of the things that you've mentioned, I mean, you know, some of the things that you've mentioned already, the IR35 and suppression of wages, we were told for years in the industry that Eastern European drivers did not suppress wages. Well, obviously, a lot of them have disappeared, and lo and behold, wages have gone up. I'll give you a couple of other examples because there's a multitude of... I'm 53. Oh, sorry, 54 now. So now, at over 50, at any time, my ability to earn a living, and I've been doing this since I was 21, I could be taken off the road. I could lose my ability to have a job because of the medicals. That's one thing. I mean, it isn't a good idea to have people with heart conditions and high blood pressure and so on and so forth driving 44-ton trucks.
We get that.
But, you know, that's it. So that's one thing, the medical side. CPCs, Certificate of Professional Competency. It's a scam. It's an insult to the professionalism of the drivers. I have been in CPC courses where people have been asleep. I have been on CPC courses where people cannot speak English. And I myself have spent 2 courses of CPC, the 8-hour courses that you have to take, watching films on my phone with my earplugs in my ears.
And this CPC, I've heard this before, it stands for Certificate of Professional Competence, doesn't it, Andy? How often do you have to do that? And my understanding is that it's a EU ruling that we could actually get rid of.
Which it should be taken down. If you need to drive in Europe, then you'd have to take the CPC. Sure. But it could be taken out by legislation easily. Now, here's the thing about the CPC, which people may not understand. The majority of drivers, unless you work for the big guys, Post Office, Eddie Stobart, Tesco's, all that guys, the majority of drivers have to do their training 8 hours a year, or 5 periods of CPC training after 5 years, right, on a weekend.
Right. And how much does the CPC cost?
Well, that's another story. Some firms pay for you to do the course. The big boys, they pay for you to do the course, and they do it in the week, Monday through Friday. So you just basically come off the road for a week and do your course, or 1 day a week you come off the course. The smaller firms, slightly smaller firms, they'll pay for it, but you have to do it on the weekend. Now, if you do it on the weekend, right, that cuts into your...
It cuts into your family time. I get that, yeah.
Well, it cuts into your... This is a legal thing. It actually cuts into your weekly legal break, or your fortnightly weekly break. So to comply with one EU law, the vast... I don't know anybody who, because you're meant to put anything which is connected with work. Even if I went in on yesterday to wash my truck, I should log that on my tachograph card as work.
Right. So it impacts on... I get that, Andy. I'm going to have to move on, Andy, because I've got a switchboard full of calls. But that's really helpful to understand just some of the challenges, issues, and the bureaucracy and the cost. And it does seem a bit odd if you still have to do a professional competency, having been driving for 32 years. But that was Andy in Andover. Thank you very much for that. And we've now got Lenny in Ashford. Good morning to you, Lenny. What would you like to say?
Well, 2 things. One, is pure conscience. Obviously, if you haven't got a conscience, I feel very, very sorry for you. And the other thing is, the value it would be to that company over decades, they haven't valued the goodwill of their company if they did, and it was successful.
Indeed. So Lenny, you're talking about the drug company and, in a sense, the conscience of the boss, which was the ethical question that I was posing in my Sunday sermon. Should they have ordered? So if you were the boss there, Lenny, what would you have done? Would you have ordered the clinical trial of ivermectin, or would you have just gone for the profits?
Well, I had a company that I ran for 40 years, and we survived purely on our goodwill and our good name. And it wasn't a big money-making company, but I had probably one of the best reputations in Kent for my company, and I had a clean conscience, and I've had a good life. Might not have earned all the money that I could have earned, but I feel very successful now. I'm in my twilight years.
So I think, Lenny, you would have ordered the clinical trial, but you haven't actually given me a definitive answer.
Oh yes, I would have done.
You would have done. Brilliant, Lenny.
Yeah, go ahead and do it. Yes.
Thank you so much for your thoughts there. We've got another call coming in. Jackie in Manchester. Good morning to you, Jackie. What are your thoughts?
Good morning, Richard. Yeah, there's been numerous peer-reviewed studies of ivermectin, and I was a bit flabbergasted with Dr. English analysis. It was originally used in the ICU units in the United States, who produced a dossier for the World Health Organization. It's been used successfully in India, Mexico, Argentina, and Japan are now using it.
That's right. I mean, there are indeed many countries that are using it. The big question, Jackie, is that and there are lots of small randomised clinical trials, and I think this is the big one, is that because no one's done a big professional peer-reviewed trial of sort of 1,000 or 2,000 patients, that seems to be the big question mark, and it just feels odd to me. It feels wrong.
Yeah, but if you think about it, Richard, under emergency use authorisation, you cannot give a drug like a vaccine if there are other treatments available.
That's right. Well, thank you very much for that, Jackie in Manchester. Your thoughts there. We've got lots and lots of tweets coming in talking about this issue. A number of people think that, from what they've read, that it's a safe drug. Others concerned. And in a sense, that's the reason why it's so extraordinary that the US government, the UK government, that Merck didn't, much earlier on, carry out a big, proper, fully peer-reviewed trial of this drug to resolve this question one way or the other. Thank you for that. Coming up after the top of the hour, I've got an interview with Alistair Campbell, no less. Yes, the spin doctor of the Blair years, to get his thoughts on the current political crisis, what he would be advising his former Prime Minister if he was in charge now. That'll be interesting. And we've also got another tweet here. This is interesting, actually, looking forwards. Bus drivers could be the next shortage. Again, lowly paid because they need to keep fares down and routes open. Bus driver being paid £11 an hour, and their cargo is a vehicle full of human capital. That was from Anna. Thank you very much on that. Well, I think it's been a fascinating first hour. Give me your call. I want to hear your views about the big ethical dilemma. If you were the boss of this big pharma company, would you have ordered the clinical trials at the start of the year, or would you have just held back and gone for the profits? 0344 499 1000. I want to hear your views, your thoughts. And then after Alistair Campbell in the second hour, we've then got also Nick Buckley, MBE, who founded a homeless charity in Manchester. And he's going to be talking about, yes, the war on woke. That will be fascinating. All sorts of woke stories in the newspapers this morning that frustrate me, probably irritate you, and annoy loads of us. So that's the first hour. Looking forward to speaking to Alistair Campbell. Keep the calls coming in. 0344 499 1000. This is Tice Talk here on Talk Radio.
Online, on DAB, and on the Talk Radio app. Talk Radio.
Offence archaeology on Twitter. Quite terrifying.
Don't beg Jeff Bezos. Charge him for God's sake.
Have a day off. Use some common sense.
People can say whatever they want.
Online and on your smart TV. Talk Radio TV News.
Live at 11, I'm Sangeeta Kandola. The energy price cap will remain throughout the winter, and the government say it's convinced there won't be gas shortages. The Prime Minister jets to Marbella for a break. And Tyson Fury keeps his heavyweight title after knocking out Deontay Wilder. The Business Secretary says the energy price cap will stay in place throughout the winter and is convinced the UK won't suffer gas shortages in the months ahead. Kwasi Kwarteng called the cap the safety net, shielding customers from instant price hikes. He said keeping it is non-negotiable despite suppliers calling for it to be scrapped. Gas prices are at record highs, with several energy companies collapsing. Energy regulator Ofgem has warned households will see significant rises in the spring when the cap is reviewed. Boris Johnson has flown to Marbella for a family holiday. He's thought to be staying in a private villa on the Costa del Sol with his pregnant wife Carrie and their 17-month-old son. He's faced criticism as the break coincides with rising energy bills and supply chain issues. A government health advisor has warned people who catch coronavirus and flu at the same time this winter are twice as likely to die. Chief Executive of the UK Health Security Agency says it's the first time COVID and flu are widely circulating simultaneously. Dr. Jenny Harris also warned there could be multiple strains of flu during an uncertain winter. Chris Packham has vowed to continue fighting for animal rights despite a suspected arson attack at his home. The wildlife campaigner was home alone when two masked men drove up to his gate and set their vehicle on fire in the early hours of Friday morning.
If you think that by burning down those gates that I'm suddenly going to become a supporter of unsustainable or illegal shooting, the unwarranted savagery wrought upon foxes in our countryside when they're torn to pieces by dogs, then you're wrong.
And Tyson Fury has retained his WBC heavyweight title after defeating Deontay Wilder in Las Vegas. Despite being knocked down twice, the Gypsy King took out Wilder in the 11th round.
You know, when it comes down to it, when I have to pull the chips out every time, I've delivered 33 times in a row. And I never let anyone down. I always give it me all, 100%. And I came into this fight tonight thinking, you can only do your best in life. And whatever's meant to be, whatever's destined, written in the stars for you will be.
Your weather fine and dry for most, wind and rain for Scotland. That's your live news on Talk Radio TV. More in half an hour.
Offence archaeology on Twitter. Quite terrifying.
Don't beg Jeff Bezos. Charge him, for God's sake.
Have a day off. Use some common sense.
People can say whatever they want.
This is Talk Radio.
Across the UK, online, on DAB+, and on the Talk Radio app.
This is Talk Radio.
Welcome back to Tice Talk here on Talk Radio. It's just gone 11:04. In the first hour, we've been talking about the ethical dilemma, what Big Pharma, what Merck should have done with ivermectin, should they have done a trial or not. We also talk about the lorry driver crisis. And I'm delighted now in the beginning of the second hour to be talking to Alistair Campbell, former Director of Communications for Tony Blair, because we've got a situation where it's only October. We're not even into the depths of winter, and yet we have got all sorts of crises around energy, about the price of it, about the supply of it. Will there be enough or not? And guess what? The Prime Minister, where is he? He's on holiday. I mean, really? Is that the right thing to be doing at this time? Alistair, a very good morning to you. Thank you for joining us. I know you and I have got some pretty strong views about the Prime Minister. What would you have been advising Tony Blair if he was Prime Minister now with these crises emerging?
Look, I think everybody understands that being Prime Minister, particularly if you do the job properly, which Tony Blair did and Boris Johnson doesn't. By the way, you spelt my name wrong there, but never mind. Instant rebuttal, very important. But you need a break every now and again. But the fact is that in this case, there are so many, you've mentioned 2 or 3 of them. There are so many massive issues at the moment that I think require really full and focused attention of the Prime Minister and the Cabinet. And look, there's a lot you can do when he travels. He has security with him. He has communications with him. I'm not pretending he can't do stuff, but has he got that focus? Has he ever had that focus? And I think, if people have been watching the Blair Brown documentary series recently, the one thing that those guys and all of us did when there was a big situation on, whether it was Northern Ireland, whether it was the fuel protest that we had, you absolutely have to focus. And I just think the guy's trolling the nation, nipping off to Marbella. He's trolling us. He's basically saying, look, I'm the Prime Minister, I'll do what the hell I want. You lot, you plebs, get up with it.
Well, he certainly does that. He does always seem to do exactly what Boris wants, regardless. So if you look at the issues facing now, tens of millions of people up and down the country, Alistair, the huge increases in energy bills, what would you be doing in terms of trying to create some solutions to help people through this winter? Because, we've not even got to the depths of winter yet, and yet people are seeing huge increases landing on their doormats day by day, week by week.
Well, look, I think there is a real problem with this government, and I'm sure we'll come round to talking to what you and I usually talk about, which is what a disaster Brexit is.
We're not going there. We're beyond that, Alistair. I want your solutions. Come on.
No, because it's a big part of it. And I think that what we've got in our country now, in our politics, especially with the government, but to some extent with Labour, is a kind of denialism about some of the problems. So, for example, you mentioned the lorry driver dispute. Now, it's not 100%. It's not entirely. Sorry, not dispute, the shortage is not entirely to do with Brexit, but a lot of it is. And the other thing is about, you look at the stuff that's on the front pages today about the Northern Ireland Protocol and the difficulties that's causing for trade. Well, that is not going to be addressed by pretending that the problem is entirely of the making of the other side. It's only going to be addressed if you have a proper grown-up adult acceptance of a situation rather than this denialism which informs this government. So in relation to the energy supply, and when I listen to they are caught in a bit of a bind here, because you're talking here about kind of basic free marketeers, somebody like Kwasi Kwarteng, who wrote that book with Raab and Patel and the rest of them, Britannia Unchanged. This is kind of what they believe in, letting the market let rip. But when the market, with a little bit of help from the Russians, creates this kind of chaos in our energy supplies and in our energy market, you have to address that. You have to accept that it's happening, go into the reasons for it. And the other thing I would certainly, you talk about what would we do, what we would certainly not have done at a time when this is all happening and these bills and cost of living crisis is growing, is plunge 5.1 million households potentially into poverty by cutting the universal credit uplift.
I agree entirely. I mean, there's short-term issues, Alistair, over this winter, and then there's the medium-term issues of actually being over-reliant on essentially importing energy, gas, in the main, and indeed electricity, because we haven't got enough of our own UK-generated
and
energy.
that's about lack of forward planning.
It's about a lack of forward, which the Conservatives have utterly failed on in the last decade.
Well, here's the other thing that Johnson tries to get away with, and I'm afraid too much of the media let him get away with it. Okay, he's only been Prime Minister for 2 years. The Conservatives have been in power for 11 years. When you look at the graphs, there's some graphics we're doing the rounds on social media yesterday of other European countries, and they're all having troubles, by the way, with gas because of these market fluctuations. But they have got more. They've got more in the tank. They've got more saved up. They've got more. They've planned ahead for this sort of stuff. Now, I do think with Merkel, for example, I think that Merkel in Germany, I mean, there's always been this kind of, I think she's been a fantastic chancellor. It's amazing that she's been there 16 years. But this kind of, the deal that she's done with Russia on energy is,
hugely controversial. I'm going to get your views, Alistair. So I get the point about universal credit. I agree with that. Short term, would you be removing VAT on domestic fuel to help some of the poorest in society over this winter?
I don't know what the cost of that would be. I think all of these things look, government is about tough choices. But what we've seen over the last couple of years, and I go back to this point about denialism, where they've spent, Johnson talking the other day about 407 billion, and people accept that a lot of that had to be spent to keep the economy going, to keep families together, etc. But when you look at the money that has been wasted, I mean, heaven knows what the bill of Test, Track and Trace is now. It was, I think, 39 billion. This is a government that spends like there is no tomorrow, but wastes like there is no tomorrow.
You and I agreed on that. I mean, it's wasting it all over the place.
The national insurance rise, which they're pretending is to fix social care. They still don't have a plan for social care. It's a short-term fix to deal with what is becoming a permanent, it's not just an NHS winter crisis, it's a permanent crisis now. So I don't know about VAT, but they're certainly going to have to look at
let me ask you on, in terms of dealing with the medium-term energy self-reliance that we need in the UK. Where are you on shale gas? Because it was in the Tory manifesto in 2017 that they wanted it. They want to create a whole new industry, tens of thousands of jobs, including lots of jobs near your beloved Burnley, Alistair. Presumably you're in favour of it.
Well, look, I put it this way. I think we now have, and I'll go back to the fact that Brexit has made this worse, we have polarised debate around everything. Now, the truth is, as to what the long-term environmental consequences are, I don't 100% know. I know what some people say, I know what other people say. However, I think the idea of just shutting down the debate on whether it might be a way, we're going to have to find new ways of supplying energy. We're going to have to find now, and it's great. I mean, I'm down in Hampshire at the moment. Actually, we've just been out on a walk, and I've seen this big kind of solar, and you look at it and you think, great, that's great, and you think, wind, fantastic. So renewables are the future for sure. But meanwhile, we've got a short-term and a medium and a long-term problems to address. And I just think it's crazy to say, under no circumstances will we look at the idea of exploring new ways, including shale gas.
Exactly, because actually as a nation, what you need is a diverse range of technologies and energy sources so you're not overexposed. Because, of course, the sun doesn't always shine and the wind doesn't always blow, as we've seen.
Eventually, if we're not careful, I mean, it's come to something when the Sunday Express, which is, clearly a newspaper on drugs most of the time, and they have these ridiculous front page headlines every day about how marvellous Boris is. And today the front page headline is Boris vows to keep us warm during winter. Is that what we're reduced to now? Is that the big goal of government, is to keep people warm?
It certainly proves that a decade of failure of Tory policy. So it sounds like you're open-minded about shale gas. I think we should be doing it. I think it's really important. I think it'll be a massive job creator. As I understand, the union GMB are pro it, and it would create huge, huge new numbers of jobs. And there are new technologies for doing it as well, for extracting it.
Listen, there are it is absolutely right to care about the future of the planet. It's absolutely right to care about the environmental impact locally and, if you like, globally. Absolutely right. But at the same time, we're just in this world now where if anybody suggests anything that feels like it might be against their worldview, like, who's behind it? Now, okay, I don't like a lot of the people who might be behind it. It might all be kind of, big private equity and all that stuff. But I want to know what people who have spent their life researching this stuff, dedicated genuinely to finding out the effects. I really want to know what they think, and I want to know whether actually, because then you can do the risk-benefit analysis.
Exactly. You can have a proper debate about it.
Yeah.
Time's marching on, Esther. I just want to get your, I think, are you pro more of these, the potential technology, the nuclear technology, the likes of the small modular reactors that Rolls-Royce are promoting, and using government money to accelerate and stimulate that?
Look, I think in terms of, I've never. Am I against the idea of people using nuclear weapons? Yes. Do I think that historically, since the Cold War, the nuclear deterrent has by and large worked? Yes, I do. That again is another debate that has got completely wrapped up with, if you're against nuclear weapons, somehow you have to be against nuclear energy. Actually, nuclear has to be part of the mix. One of the reasons I mentioned Germany, one of the reasons why Germany has got itself into this kind of pretty difficult situation with Nord Stream 2 and the Russians is because Angela Merkel, for political reasons at the time,
she cancelled nuclear.
And we've got to have a mix, and we've just got to start being a bit more grown up about it. I mean, otherwise, we're literally talking about the lights going out.
And you mentioned private equity groups, and this is one of my big anxieties, Alistair, about the Tories have basically outsourced all of the risk of creating energy. Particularly with renewables, to the big private equity groups. They need returns of 15% on their money. I actually genuinely now have the view, Alistair, that we should be looking at, I'm not comfortable that our utility providers are overseas owned. The US don't allow it, the French don't allow it. I think it strategically exposes us. They're making huge sums. Where are you on nationalisation of a percentage of utilities? Would you be in favour of, for example, nationalising 50% of public utilities to keep the cost down?
It's so funny you say that. When Ed Miliband was leader of the Labour Party suggesting those sorts of things, he was being condemned as an out-and-out Marxist. And now that is the kind of debate that I think we have to have.
And we do have to have it.
Yes, we do, because I think that we're becoming, it's not just in energy, by the way, we are becoming so reliant on business and, I'm afraid, political interests who don't ultimately necessarily have our national interest at heart. I think you're seeing this in football now. I find it, I'm a massive football fan. I find it a little bit disturbing that now the top clubs has just become part of this big geostrategic battle between the Qataris and the Emiratis and now the Saudis and the Russians and so forth. Now, I'm not saying it's as serious as something like this, but it's part of the same thing. Somebody was telling me the other day, I don't know if this is true, I was walking down Regent Street with somebody who was saying, going through the buildings, and the businesses that were in them and going Norway, Qatar, Norway.
Oh, I can tell you as a real estate guy, it's true, Alistair. But we do need to have this debate about who owns our utilities and why is it so expensive. And it feels to me.
And who owns Britain? This is the other thing, because on the one hand, you've got all these bloody rich dukes and
it's a family show
that own masses and masses and masses of the UK, and now you're mixing it up with all the the oligarchies from overseas. And I do feel that people are kind of, when people talk about the country leaving them behind or feeling they're not part of it, I think that is a part of it. People just feel, well, who owns this place anymore?
And I think it's a really key question. I actually think that a percentage of our public utilities, to keep the cost down, should be nationalised, so you get the benefit of a win-win where you get private sector management, UK pension fund ownership, and a percentage of national ownership. And then I think you can literally get the best of all worlds. I'm really concerned, Alistair, about strategic industries, particularly in defence, aerospace, engineering, being bought up by overseas private equity groups that then essentially break them up, asset strip, and sell them down the river.
Absolutely, totally. And the other thing I would say about that is that I think that we've if you look at what I mentioned, COVID, and I don't say this lightly. I think Johnson's government has allowed a level of corruption into our government procurement systems that may always have been. People have talked about, all governments are corrupt. I don't buy that, actually. I don't think Mrs. Thatcher's government was fundamentally financially corrupt at all. I don't think David Cameron was financially corrupt, although I think he's let himself down badly.
For sure.
Since he left office. But I actually think with this situation where, there are now so many examples of what, if it was happening in Bosnia or Botswana or Greece or Ghana, we'd say it was corruption.
I know, it's quite extraordinary.
And that is about saying to people with big money, you can do whatever you want. No accountability. Don't worry, we'll cover for you.
There's no question.
And here's another thing. You started by mentioning about the holiday. We still don't know who paid for the last holiday.
I'm not sure we ever will.
Exactly, because there's no proper accountability.
There you are. Well, that's the role of the media. Alistair Campbell, thank you so much for joining us, for sharing your thoughts on those key issues. And I look forward to your thoughts on what Alistair had to say, my views. Give us a call, 0344 499 1000. The time is 20 minutes past 11. This is Tice Talk, at the home of common sense. It's Talk Radio.
Online, on DAB, and on the Talk Radio app. Talk Radio.
Offence archaeology on Twitter. Quite terrifying.
Don't beg Jeff Bezos. Charge him, for God's sake.
Have a day off. Use some common sense.
People can say whatever they want.
This is Talk Radio.
Across the UK, online, on DAB+, and on the Talk Radio app.
This is Talk Radio.
Welcome back to Tice Talk here at 23 minutes past 11 this Sunday morning. Thanks for listening, thanks for watching. And we've just had Alistair Campbell on, and my goodness me, that certainly has triggered a reaction. Someone here, Angela, says, I like Alistair Campbell, thank you for having him on this show. Whereas another number says, Alistair Campbell, really? Is that the best we can do for guests? Look, I think actually it'd be a bit more boring if we were just an echo chamber of everybody saying exactly the same thing. I think it's right to have different views, different thoughts, challenges, and hear the other side of the debate. We can then continue to agree with our own views, our own beliefs, but it's right to hear all sides. So I'm glad that we've been able to hear his thoughts, even though many of my listeners and viewers may fundamentally, significantly, completely disagree with his track record and what he says. Nevertheless, it's interesting to hear what his thoughts on where we are. We've got calls coming in. Mary in Northampton. Good morning, Mary. What are your thoughts?
Well, I'm a locum in the area, a GP locum, and I've been watching the BBC trying to denigrate all treatments other than vaccines for patients for over a year. And we know that ivermectin has been identified as an antiviral, and we know much of its mechanisms. And we know that at the beginning of the pandemic, it was identified as being effective against COVID. And the question is, well, what's the dose? Now, in nursing homes, we've been using it as a treatment for scabies for ages, but I can't get hold of it now. I couldn't prescribe it even off license if I wanted to. And the question is why. I asked a local pharmacist if he could get it for me, and he said, yeah, well, it could cost you about £400, which is crazy because it's very cheap medication. And you have to ask why it was removed. But I'm coming on to the ethics of this and the ethics of the Merck CEO. Well, Merck and others did contribute to a study, and it was a well-publicized study in Colombia, which showed a negative effect, but that study was also contributed to by a whole number of different pharmacy companies. And of course it would be in their interest to show a negative study because the moment that you have a possible treatment outside of vaccines, then the EUAs for vaccines and other treatments becomes deferred. You can't have the EUA if there's an ongoing treatment. So of course it's in the CEO's interest, not only of Merck but of other pharmaceutical companies, to conduct a study. Now, I'm going to say about that study, I've looked at it, and
this is the Columbia study.
This is the Columbia study, and I've looked at it. I'm not particularly trained in research. I've read a lot of papers, and it's laughable. It's so laughable that if the people who are doing the hatchet job on the studies on ivermectin in COVID, and those were oddly a medical student called Lawrence, who then summed up the people who call themselves thugs, James Heath, Sheldrick, Mayor of its Cats. If that were done on that particular study, it would be laughed out of the park.
Yeah.
It really would.
Mary, I haven't studied that Columbia one, but I know there were questions about it. My point is that to resolve all of this, Merck should have done their own, unquestionable, properly peer-reviewed, with a panel, professional study, and that would have surely got to the bottom of it one way or the other. Mary, thank you so much. I'm going to move on. We've got calls pouring in. Martin in Nottinghamshire, who's been an HGV driver for 33 years. Good morning to you.
Good morning.
Hi, what are your thoughts, Martin, on the lorry driver crisis?
Yeah, your second contributor, the driver who's also currently, he's done 32 years, I did hear most of his thing. That made a lot more sense. But your first driver had no real experience, I don't think, and he hadn't traced the problem. As your second contributor said, I currently have a very good job in the driving side of it compared to most. But the problem is not just about the money. It's a lot more than just the money. It's about the way we are treated as second-class citizens by most of the public. It's the way trucks are not wanted anywhere. It's by the fact that the facilities for drivers are few and far between. Much of them are poor quality. The ones that are good quality are you can't get in. Overnight parking, for example, if you're not there by 6:30, 7 o'clock, you can't get on the site because it's full up. Drivers having to park in laybys because they have no other alternative, or because the company that they work for will not pay for them to park in a proper lorry park.
And so, Martin, who should be investing? Who should be investing in the facilities? Is that the role of the service stations?
It's everybody. Government, for a start, should legislate for every area, like every large town or city, to provide council or local authority provided parking, which should be run by independent, not run by the local authority, but provided.
Should be properly run, because as I understand, that it is the quality of facilities is much better across continental Europe. Is that right?
As I understand, I have not done much in the way of continental drive, not in the truck, but I have been on the continent in cars, and their facilities for trucks are better.
Right.
There's no doubt about it.
So it's facilities, and then there's IR35. Has that affected you, Martin?
I don't really know much about IR35. I understand it's about self-employed, is it?
That's right. Yes, self-employed and insurance deductions.
Yeah. Well, when I came into this job many years ago, there were a lot of companies used to employ drivers on a percentage basis.
That's right, yes. Martin, that's very helpful. Martin, I'm going to have to go to the news in a second, but thank you so much. That was Martin in Nottinghamshire with his views on the lorry driver crisis. Coming up after the news break, I've got Nick Buckley, MBE, founder of the charity Mancunian Way, with his latest thoughts on the war on woke and also on the performance of the police force, Greater Manchester Police, where he lives. It's 11:30. It's time for the news. It's Talk Radio.
Online and on your smart TV. Talk Radio TV News.
Here are your headlines. I'm Sangeeta Kandola. The government say the energy price cap will stay throughout the winter, despite calls for it to be scrapped. Boris Johnson takes a break on the Costa del Sol. And the Gypsy King keeps hold of his crown after knocking out Deontay Wilder in Las Vegas. The business secretary says the energy price cap will stay in place throughout the winter, despite suppliers calling for it to be scrapped. Kwasi Kwarteng called the cap the safety net, shielding customers from instant price hikes, and said keeping it is non-negotiable. Gas prices are at record highs, with several energy companies collapsing in recent months. Energy regulator Ofgem has warned households will see significant rises in the spring when the cap is reviewed. Boris Johnson has flown to Marbella for a holiday after delivering his party conference speech this week. It's reported he's staying in a private villa on the Costa del Sol with his pregnant wife Carrie and their 17-month-old son. He's faced criticism as the break coincides with soaring energy bills and supply chain disruptions. Chris Packham has vowed to continue fighting for animal rights, despite arsonists targeting his home. The wildlife campaigner was home alone when two masked and hooded men drove up to his gate and set their vehicle on fire in the early hours of Friday morning. And Tyson Fury has retained his WBC heavyweight crown after knocking out Deontay Wilder in Las Vegas. In a breathtaking match, the Gypsy King came back from 2 knockdowns before eventually taking out Wilder in the 11th round as the rivals met for their long-awaited trilogy bout. Fury later tweeted, "Don't ever doubt me. When the chips are down, I always deliver." That's your news on Talk Radio TV. More in half an hour.
Talk Radio.
Across the UK, online, on DAB+, and on the Talk Radio app.
This is Talk Radio.
Welcome back to Tice Talk here on Talk Radio. It's 11:33. We've been talking in this hour. We were talking with Alistair Campbell. That's upset a few people. Before that, in the first hour, we would talk about the ethics of big drug companies with regard to new treatments and ivermectin. But there's lots of other things we need to get into. We need to get into the performance of our police forces and, of course, the war on woke that drives us all mad. And I'm delighted to be joined now here in the studio by Nick Buckley Mbe, founder of the charity Mancunia Way, and also a mayoral candidate earlier this year in Manchester. Nick, very good morning. Great to see you here in London. Thanks for being with us. So, you know Manchester very well. You've lived there most, if not all, your life. What's going on with Greater Manchester Police Force? Because, you know, here in London, we've had concerns about the Met Police. We've had concerns about the leadership of Cressida Dick. It seems that she was reappointed only because they sort of basically couldn't find anybody else, which seems pretty derisory and extraordinary. Tell us about what's going on in Greater Manchester, because there's not much good news up there as well either.
It's worse news in Greater Manchester, and Greater Manchester Police was the reason why I stood against Andy Burnham for the Mayor of Greater Manchester. It was December last year, and the Government Inspectorate of Constabularies came out with Greater Manchester Police are failing so poorly, we're taking them into special measures. The only police force in the country in special measures. And that's when I went, someone's got to stand up and talk about this, because this is appalling.
Unbelievable. And what's the situation now? That was last December.
Yep.
And so there was a new chief constable. The previous one was basically fired or forced out. Is that right?
He was allowed to resign on his own terms. In any other company, you'd have been sacked. And Greater Manchester Police missed and put in the bin something like 120,000 crimes weren't even recorded. They basically went straight from the phone call into a bin, and that's why they went into special measures. So he left, and then a new chief constable was recruited, and up to now he's been saying all the right things. But again, we're going to have to give him a couple of years to turn the ship around.
And what's the latest? So they're still in special measures, is that right? When would the first review be?
It was a few weeks ago, and the government said you've still made no improvements. But the chief constable's only been in post a month.
Right.
So he's not a miracle worker.
It's the beginning of his journey. But
he's passed the first test, though. The first test for him, considering what he was saying, was the Pride weekend in Manchester in August. And my test I put for him was, are we going to see police officers dressed up as clowns? Are we going to see police officers dancing and gyrating in the street, a part of the entertainment? Are you going to spend thousands decorating your cars? And he passed the test because he did none of it.
Okay, so you're optimistic that there might be change in the air for Greater Manchester Police, and you know it's a huge police force. Is it right? It's the second largest.
I believe it's the second largest in the country.
And this comes down to the whole issue about the quality of leadership in our institutions, whether it's frankly the leadership in the cabinet, the leadership of the police force, the leadership of our civil service departments. I just think we need much stronger, much more robust, much more principled, clear, strong leadership. Well, that's work in progress. Keep us in touch with how it's going, and particularly we'll talk again when that first review is out. And I know the other issue, woke issues, drive you completely bonkers in the same way it drives many of my listeners and viewers and me bonkers. Give us an update. What's the latest madness going on out there?
So if you look at the newspapers today, we've got BA now is saying we're going to start using gender neutral terms because we don't want to offend anybody. We want to be inclusive and tolerant.
So this is British Airways, or should we now rename it Woke Airways? It looks like we're going to hear from the captain on board. Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain speaking. You've all got to go gender neutral. I mean, is this really what's going on?
I'm not sure we should call them woke airlines. I think we should call them we think the passengers of idiots airlines. Because if you look at BA is still flying to countries where it's illegal and death penalty for homosexuality. They're still flying to China, who have locked up 1 million Muslims in concentration camps. BA sacked in 2013 a Christian lady for having her tiny little crucifix on display while she was working. Does any of this sound tolerant and inclusive to you? It's a way of them shining some shiny things, saying, look at the shiny things, don't look at our past record and don't look at our prices, don't look at our customer service, look at what we're telling you to look at. They treat us like idiots, and maybe we are.
Well, I don't think we are. I think actually we realise that that most of this stuff is nonsense and doesn't help the country get run properly, get managed properly, and get governed properly, which actually I feel that's my passion, and I think that's what most people just want, so that we can all get on with our daily lives. And then there's also another issue that you spotted in the Mail on Sunday and the Ministry of Defence.
Again, you should ask me a couple of years ago about these woke companies and woke issues. I would have said the army and armed forces never will fall for this, because if you talk about a serious job, defence of the realm is the most serious job we have, but they're falling for it. And they're coming out now with guidance on inclusive language for soldiers and gender neutral language, and it's really, you've got a crazed terrorist running at you with a bayonet and a bomb, and you're going to have to worry about his pronouns before you shoot him. It's absolutely crazy. And if you want to see how crazy this is, go on YouTube, and there's a couple of YouTube clips at the moment. One shows an American recruitment ad
for the American military.
For the American military, and it's a cartoon, and it's this little girl who's got two mummies, who lives in California, who marches on the street for pride, and she now runs a rocket-propelled system for the US military. And it's a nice little story, makes you feel good. And then they show you what the Russians are putting on their TV to recruit people, and it looks like the Russian out of Rocky IV, Drago, and it's this huge superhuman man training press-ups, running, and there's 50 others behind him. I know which one would terrify me.
That's right. I mean, I just found it extraordinary that actually these institutions, the MOD, British Airways, that they've got time to think about this stuff. I really do. I mean, personally, I would much rather the MOD was focusing on getting the quality of its buying, the quality of its procurement properly organised, rather than worrying about its inclusive language guide, which just seems they should be. There's so much more things they need to be focused on.
I used to work with the police. I used to be based in police stations in Greater Manchester. I was never a police officer, but I was based in police stations. I've seen their recruitment process if you want promotion to inspector, chief inspector, superintendent. And you have to bring something new and different to that interview. And now you have to bring something inclusive or tolerant to that interview. And it's like a positive feedback loop. So when you bring these ideas to your recruitment panel, the wackiest, craziest, woke ideas are deemed now the most valuable, and you get promoted. So within the organisation, same with the army now, I would imagine, they're promoting the most woke because that's what comes across at the interview, and that's what they're valuing most of all.
And what worries me is that the cost of this, it's not just the time, but it's actually real money. And if you take an institution like the NHS, where if you're a diversity manager, you might be being paid £75,000 a year, which is essentially about double what a nurse and at the average nurse's salary on the front line, giving care, making a real difference to people's lives, relieving pain, helping them getting cured. It just seems completely back to front.
And again, if you look at the NHS, it's the most diverse workforce in the country. They employ something like 3 times the level of BAME people in the country. A third of all doctors and specialists are from the BAME community, which is only 13%, but they're employing 2, 3, 4 times the amount of people. They don't need diversity managers. They need less managers to begin with, and they need more nurses and more doctors.
Absolutely right, Nick. You're so right. The NHS needs less managers and more people on the front line, and we need to be focusing on the things that really matters to people's daily lives across the board, but in particular things like healthcare. Nick Buckley, thank you so much for coming in. Great to hear your views, your thoughts. Come back to tell us about how Greater Manchester Police is performing under its new Chief Constable. The time is approaching 11:43. Give us a call, 0344 499 1000, or tweet us at Talk Radio. All sorts of views coming in on both our discussion about Big Pharma, ivermectin, the ethics, and also the thoughts of Alistair Campbell. So we'll be going to your calls after the break. It's 11:43. This is Tice Talk, and it is, of course, the home of common sense. It's Talk Radio.
Online, on DAB, and on the Talk Radio app. Talk Radio.
Offence archaeology on Twitter. Quite terrifying.
Don't beg Jeff Bezos. Charge him, for God's sake.
Have a day off. Use some common sense.
People can say whatever they want.
This is Talk Radio.
Across the UK, online, on DAB+, and on the Talk Radio app.
This is Talk Radio.
Welcome back to Tice Talk here on Talk Radio. It's 11:46, and in the second hour we had a good long discussion with Alistair Campbell. And actually, I know some people have been quite upset about that and clocked off, but actually, Mark here says, I actually managed to listen to the whole of the interview because I'm the first person to interview him properly and not let him go off on one of his champagne socialist rants. There we are. And Lord Swift also surprised himself by being able to actually agreed with him on looking at being pro-nuclear and pro-fracking, and I'm pro both. So there we are. Well, we've got some callers coming in to talk about some of the issues we've been discussing this morning. Coming up at the top of the hour at 12 o'clock, we're going to be looking at the energy crisis and looking in detail at shale gas and the potential ways that we can extract it literally under the earth of the north of England. But for now, we've got Mary in Glasgow. Good morning to you, Mary. What are your thoughts on what we've been talking about?
Well, I was wanting to speak to you about what Dr. Peter English said about ivermectin, been not an efficacious treatment at all. And I was really, really shocked by that, because Dr. Tess Laurie, as you are well aware, has done meta-analysis and looked at peer-reviewed studies completely thoroughly. And she's got integrity, and she's not got any links to the pharmaceutical companies or no conflicts of interest. But the reason why I was phoning was he mentioned the principal trial, which has been conducted at Oxford just now.
That's right.
And basically, I looked it up very quickly and typed in principal trial study criteria. And basically, anybody over the age of 18 can take part in that trial. It's not face-to-face, and it's up to 14 days after symptoms. And I was quite shocked at that, because basically all the doctors around the world that have been using ivermectin and treating people successfully say the key to treatment is early treatment. That's really important before people deteriorate and their oxygen levels start, dropping and they're extremely ill. So I was really shocked at that you can take part in that trial up to day 14. So if you have symptoms of a cough, and you're breathless and you've got a fever, and you've been maybe taking paracetamol and staying at home, because that's what they say to people, just stay at home. And by day 10 and 11, you phone up and say,
Indeed.
I'm not feeling so good. And then they start the treatment. To me, it's set up for failure.
Well,
And,
I think the point is, and in a sense, that's why I've been saying that actually, what you want is an all-encompassing trial that looks at different dosage rates. I know that Tess Laurie has been saying you've got to look at different dosages and at different times from the onset of symptoms, so that you can work out what is the most efficient, what is the absolute prime time to be able to start use or not using it, if it works or if it doesn't work. But fundamentally, it should be a really big, comprehensive, professionally run trial, and that's what worries me. It sounds like you've studied the Oxford principle details more than I have. But thank you very much.
Can I just say something else? Why is everything being silenced about this? You can't have a democracy when there's so much censorship. And do you not think it's the Prime Minister's and the Health Secretary's moral duty to use the treatment that costs cents?
It is worrying, because censorship in the media has been an issue. We're able to talk about it because we're putting it in the context of the overall, and it does worry me, Mary, and that's why I'm trying to raise it. I'm not saying it definitely works or definitely doesn't. I don't know. I'm not a scientist. I haven't studied it. What I am saying is that there are lots of people around the world who think that it may help at various points, and there are lots of people who think that it wouldn't. The right way to resolve this is to have a proper, big, professional clinical trial, and the right person to have done that surely should have been the godfather of the drug, the company that founded it in the first place. Mary, thank you so much. We've got Alison in Stirling as well. Alison, good morning to you.
Good morning, Richard.
What are your thoughts this morning?
Yeah, a bit about the ivermectin. I think there was a nursing home in California where the doctor used it and he didn't have any deaths at all. And it's only 10 pence for a tablet, where it's no...
That's right. I mean, it is literally. I mean, it is so cheap. Are you still there, Alison? I may have lost you, but it's literally pennies per pill.
I know, and there's no money to be made in that for people that's wanting to make money, and they're taking it at the risk of the public, the way I see it. But the other thing I wanted to speak to you about, the energy power. I'm a bit feared with the nuclear because of the waste. And then if there was a war and you had all these nuclear things, if the bomb we would go up like a boom. And the other thing was the energy power cap. I moved because I had a disagreement with the company, and I moved to People's Energy or something, and then they've went bust. So I've not got any energy cap, and I've been sent to Scottish Power, and I'm still waiting to hear from them. So there'll be a lot of people like me that's either working with tax credits, and we're not getting energy caps. There'll be thousands, millions of us.
I think that's right, Alison, and that's my understanding, that if your energy firm goes bust, and if you've got a fixed price contract, you get moved, so you won't lose your energy supply, but you'll get moved to a different company. But at that moment, your fixed rate contract, as I understand, disappears, and you're back to paying whatever the standard variable rate is. So I suspect that may be the position that unfortunately you find yourself in. Is that right?
Yeah, I find there'll be a lot of people, because people were advised to move to different companies for caps to save money, especially the poorer people. topped up with the wages, and we're all snookered now, basically.
That's right. And actually, I've had a situation where, with my own business affairs, where we used a relatively new energy company. It's a bit like the Wild West out there. I mean, literally, Alison, you and I could set up an energy company, a website. We could start getting customers in, and then we could take the money, but not pass it on to the company that's actually generated the energy. And then we go bust, and the energy company hasn't received their money. And that's what happened with me. We then got a phone call from British Gas saying, you haven't paid the bill. And I said, well, we paid the supplier that supplies it to us. And of course, they hadn't passed it on. This is literally the Wild West energy supply situation that we find ourselves in. And guess what? This all happened under a Conservative ideological government. Thank you, Alison, for that. We've got Tom in Rugby. Good morning, Tom.
Good morning, how are you?
I'm good, thanks. What are your thoughts?
I was listening to the conversation earlier, and medical management was mentioned, and the idea is that somehow or another the NHS management is gross and bloated, and there are far too many managers and all the rest of it. Well, look, I was a medical manager for quite a few years before I retired, and that is nonsense. The NHS management is actually very lean compared to industry.
Well, that's interesting, Tom, for that view, because as I understand, there's about 50%, maybe 52, give or take, of the NHS staff who are not frontline. They are either in management or something related or administrative. And then you've also got the large number of quangos. So there are some. What I'm hearing from frontline staff is that they find the bureaucracy of the system a real burden on their time and a bit of a blockage. So, what's your experience on that?
Well, the trouble about figures like 50% is it doesn't really break it down into categories. An awful lot of the managers are actually clinicians, like doctors. I was a medical manager, but actually I was also a full-time doctor, working in the clinical front line. A lot of the senior nurses, they're classed as managers, but actually they're doing incredibly important roles, running wards, sorting out rotas, ordering stuff, a whole lot of stuff. But they're classed as managers. That's got to be done.
Of course. Okay. So right. So that's a really important distinction that you feel may not be being properly expressed in the data that is being put out there.
No, exactly. In my own department, which is a radiology and X-ray department, apart from the radiologists and all the radiographers who take the images and run the scanners, you actually have got a huge back room of administrative staff, because all this process has got to be administered. You know, you've got to get appointments made, reports sorted out, appointments sent out. There's a whole range of administrative stuff that has to be done. And actually, the team I know, they were very, very stretched. There were just almost too few of them.
So your view, Tom, your view then is that actually the administration, the management is relatively efficient. Is that what I'm hearing from you?
I'm not saying it's necessarily efficient. There are always areas you can improve efficiency. And, you know, during my time there, we did an awful lot of stuff to improve efficiency. And I could give you some examples, but they'd probably take too long. But, you know, there are continuing work to improve efficiency. But, yeah, and it's a very big service. And obviously in a service of that size, there will be inefficiencies.
Yeah.
Let's not just ignore what is actually being done and being done very well.
Fantastic. Look, Tom, that's really helpful to get that perspective and get greater clarity on the definition of managers. That was Tom in Rugby, a retired medical manager. I really appreciate that. Well, we're approaching the top of the hour. I hope you've been enjoying it. We've got, coming up after the break, we're going to be talking about shale gas, fracking, new technologies, and, of course, a bit of sport. The time is 11:57, and you're listening to Tice Talk here at the home of common sense, where you can have a big, broad debate with people you may not agree with to hear different views. That's why we had Alistair Campbell on, different perspectives, different thoughts. That's how you get honest debate, open debate, transparent debate. I think that's really important, rather than shutting down debate or just listening to one side of an echo chamber. That really, I don't think, helps anybody. Tweet coming in here. Thank you, Richard, for tackling the subject of big pharma's dodgy ethics. Other mainstream media either avoid it completely or have just one side of big pharma's narrative. Well, stay with me. Coming up after the break, shale gas. We'll be talking the technology, all about that. It's Tice Talk It is, of course, Talk Radio.
Online, on DAB, and on the Talk Radio app. Talk Radio.
Offence archaeology on Twitter. Quite terrifying.
Don't beg Jeff Bezos. Charge him, for God's sake.
Have a day off. Use some common sense.
People can say whatever they want.
Online and on your smart TV. Talk Radio TV News.
Live at 12, I'm Sangeeta Kandola. The energy price cap will remain throughout the winter, and the government say it's convinced there won't be gas shortages.
Whoever you are, you burned down the wrong gates.
Chris Packham vows to keep fighting for animal rights despite his home being attacked by arsonists. And Tyson Fury keeps his heavyweight title after knocking out Deontay Wilder. The Business Secretary says the energy price cap will stay in place throughout the winter and is convinced the UK won't suffer gas shortages in the months ahead. Kwasi Kwarteng called the cap the safety net, shielding customers from instant price hikes. He said keeping it is non-negotiable despite suppliers calling for it to be scrapped. Gas prices are at record highs, with several energy companies collapsing. Energy regulator Ofgem has warned households will see significant rises in the spring when the cap is reviewed. The Home Office says a record number of people have tried to cross the Channel from France this year. It comes as the French Interior Minister claimed the UK hasn't paid the money it promised under a bilateral agreement to prevent illegal crossings. But the government says the UK is working effectively with France to tackle the issue. A government health advisor has warned people who catch coronavirus and flu at the same time this winter are twice as likely to die. Chief Executive of the UK Health Security Agency says it's the first time COVID and flu are widely circulating simultaneously. Dr. Jenny Harris also warned there could be multiple strains of flu during an uncertain winter. Almost 500,000 learner drivers hoping to take their test are facing waits of up to 6 months. Driver, Vehicle and Standards Agency figures show the number of tests fell by 73% last year due to the pandemic. Chris Packham has vowed to continue fighting for animal rights despite a suspected arson attack at his home. The wildlife campaigner was home alone when 2 masked men drove up to his gate and set their vehicle on fire on Friday morning.
If you think that by burning down those gates that I'm suddenly going to become a supporter of unsustainable or illegal shooting, the unwarranted savagery wrought upon foxes in our countryside when they're torn to pieces by dogs, then you're wrong.
And Tyson Fury has retained his WBC heavyweight title after defeating Deontay Wilder in Las Vegas, knocking him out in the 11th round.
You know, when it comes down to it, when I have to pull the chips out every time, I've delivered 33 times in a row, and I never let anyone down. I always give it me all, 100%.
That's your live news on Talk Radio TV. More in half an hour.
Offence archaeology on Twitter. Quite terrifying.
Don't beg Jeff Bezos. Charge him, for God's sake.
Have a day off. Use some common sense.
People can say whatever they want.
This is Talk Radio.
Across the UK, online, on DAB+, and on the Talk Radio app.
This is Talk Radio.
Welcome back to Tice Talk here on Talk Radio. It is good afternoon. It's 4 minutes past 12. The weather is still grey here in central London. I hope it's better with you. We've been talking a range of issues this morning, the ethics of Big Pharma, new treatments. We've been talking with Alistair Campbell about the energy issues, and we'll be coming on to that in a second. But we've just got a quick call here. Eleonora from Aldershot. Good afternoon, Eleonora. What are your thoughts on...
Yes, I completely agree with the use of ivermectin. There should be more treatments available because one size does not fit all. And as the lady said earlier, Merck, I think, was paid to discredit the ivermectin. And they are making a similar drug now to ivermectin anyway.
Yes, and to be clear, we don't actually know it's similar, and I'm not sure the evidence shows that. But the question is whether or not they should have done a proper professional trial. I mean,
they definitely should. I think I remember reading somewhere that Bill Gates did research, but he used far too little ivermectin, far too late in the treatment. As the lady said, it was laughable.
I mean, I think that's the point, is that there's these lots of different stories, and, you know, there might be misinformation, there might be good information, there might be anecdotal information. Do you agree with me, Eleanor, that the point is we don't know, and, you know, we can have our views, but what should have happened is that there should be a proper, big, early professional trial, which would have been able to help us all.
Yeah, Tess Laurie has tried to do that. Actually.
She's tried, and you know, it's been a struggle. Eleanor, thank you so much. I've got to go to my next guest, but I just wanted to get you in there. We're going to now move on to looking at the detail of the potential shale gas industry here in the UK. And I just thought I'd remind you of a few things that this government said in recent years. Back in 2014, there was a young energy minister by the name of Matt Hancock, and he said we need to extract the gas that's deep beneath the ground to improve our energy security and provide jobs and prosperity. The current business secretary, one Mr. Kwasi Kwarteng, he admits that actually he used to be pro-fracking, but now he's changed his mind. The Conservative manifesto back in 2017 said that it was going to create a whole new shale gas industry which would give us energy security, cheap, reliable energy, and create tens of thousands of jobs. And guess what happens? A few dodgy adverts from the likes of Friends of the Earth, who then got their knuckles rapped by the Advertising Standards Authority, a few eco-bullies, and the cowardly government bottle it, run for the hills literally, and that was the end of the shale gas potential industry here in the UK, and we're now literally paying the price of that, that cowardly behaviour by the government, because we're importing significant quantities of gas, and we're exposed to the likes of Putin putting a limit on the supply of gas, increasing the price? Well, I'm delighted to be joined now by a specialist in the engineering around fracking, around extraction of gas, Edward Martin, who's the managing director of Metric Square, who's been very involved in the gas industry for some 30 years, to talk about this. Edward, a very good afternoon to you. Thanks for joining me. So we've got, I think we may have a bit of a delay on the line, but I'll just keep going. Edward, hopefully you can hear me. So we've got this issue now where, in a sense, fracking has become almost a sort of a bad censored word. You can't even talk about it, when actually it's being used, of course, in many countries around the world, safely, easily, successfully, and in particular in the United States, it's had the beneficial impact of dramatically reducing the price of gas and also reducing the US's reliance on importing gas. So what are your thoughts on what's going on with the technology around the different types of fracking and the potential here in the UK, where, as I understand, we've got over 50 years' worth of potential gas under North England? We may not have Edward on the line. We're going to keep trying to connect to Edward, but it does seem to me extraordinary that the government could so quickly, utterly do a massive U-turn on this big issue, an issue that would create proper security of energy, that would have brought down the price of gas, that would have dramatically, literally by now, if the government had proceeded with the shale gas industry in 16, 17, 18, then we would by now be benefiting from that extra security, that lower cost gas. We wouldn't be so reliant on importing gas. And I think we have got Edward back on the line now. Edward, good afternoon. So just give us a heads up on the latest technology, because I know you're involved in one particular type of technology called slotting, in relation to fracking, extracting shale gas from under our feet.
Yeah, well, we have to really go back to what is fracking, to be quite honest. And in the 30 years that I've been in the industry, when you talk to people, we're talking about gas exploration or oil exploration, it doesn't matter what. In retrospect, they're both the same. So it surprises me nowadays, with all the information out here, that people don't understand gas exploration. There's 7 elements, basically, to gas exploration. There's preparation of rig site, there's drilling, there's cementing and testing, and then there's what we class as well completion. Now, well completion is when you send the perforation gun down to perforate the well to open the well. Then once the well is open, then you're looking at fracking. Now, what we do is we go back to step 4 at well completion. And instead of perforating it, we slice it. Now, you can call it whatever you want, really. There's quite a few different names. It's hydro slicing, there's terrace slicing. It's all basically the same throughout the industry. Now, this has been around. If we look at it, perforation it was first brought together in 1947. It's been around about 69 years. Hydro slotting, or slotting perforation, has been around about 38 years.
So it's been around a long time, Edward. So, and just to help us, the company Quadrilla that started the fracking near Blackpool, were they using the perforation or the slotting?
They're using perforation.
Right.
As far as I know, we are one of the only companies in the UK that deal with SPT, which is slotting perforation technology. It's based in the States, very, very successful. We originally started out using it for depleted wells. So if a well is producing 5 barrels a day, then we can up, by using slotting, we can up the rate of production to 15, 20, depending on obviously the formation. But what we found in gas, and especially in shale gas in America, is that the return is better.
And so just how in terms of what we've been doing in the UK, and obviously the initial fracking, the test wells that were done were then shut down. Would it have been right, actually, should they have used different technologies in different wells in order to essentially spread the knowledge, spread the learning curve of doing it, which would have given additional confidence to people in the UK who may have had concerns, who may have listened to some of the misinformed advertising by some of the environmental groups like Friends of the Earth? Would that have been the sensible thing to do?
Absolutely. When drilling and fracking, when gas exploration first started in the UK, there was a very big lack of fracking engineers. So once again, they've had to go bring in fresh blood to learn about fracking. Fracking it's always had a bad reputation because you cannot control it. You cannot control fracking.
And whereas with slotting you can control it more, is that right?
Absolutely, it is totally controllable. It cuts, if you like, it cuts into the reservoir around about 5 feet.
So why wouldn't the government or Quadrilla have used that as a essentially in addition to, in a separate well, the perforation technique?
Perforation is purely and solely because it's cheap.
It's cheaper. Okay, so it's a question of money. Surprise, surprise. Lowest cost, and in a sense, what we're seeing is that the environmental lobby groups were able to win the debate, win the argument with government against the perforation technique, and it sounds like the government didn't look at other techniques. Is that right?
Quite possible, yeah. I mean, as they say, it's been around for many years. In the States, it's what they use majority of the time. As I said, we first started on this on depleted wells, but now what we found is that on new wells, opening up new wells, the technology works.
And Edward, before we finish, time's marching on. How long would it take to get a shale gas industry up and running and contributing to gas supplies here in the UK? If we press the button tomorrow, how long is it before we would see supplies?
Well, one of the biggest problems is planning. If you look at a lot of the companies that have got hold licenses now, a lot of their planning has run out. Now, the planning situation is incredible.
Okay, but assuming you've got planning physically, once you've got planning, you're on site.
If in retrospect, you could say 3 months.
Only 3 months?
3 to 6 months.
Okay, so with what you're really saying is, with a bit of contingency, within a year, you could be extracting gas and contributing to the UK's gas supply from our own shale gas that is literally under the feet of people in the north of England. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, it's quite possible. Once you go through all the different rigmaroles and planning applications, because every section has a planning application for it.
Sure.
And that's one of the biggest problems in the UK.
But that's all about, the bottom line is there, Edward, that's about political will. That's about recognising that energy security and self-reliance is a fundamental part of a government's duty to its citizens. And of course, this was government policy.
Absolutely.
Edward, thank you so much for those thoughts. Absolutely fascinating as we look at the potential for shale gas. That was Edward Martin, Managing Director of Metric Square, very experienced engineer in gas extraction, talking in particular about a different type of fracking from the one that Quadrilla was using in Blackpool. And that's the point, isn't it? That actually there's always different technologies. Both these technologies, I understand, actually have existed for a while. But a government's duty is to look at different technologies. It's rather like we need a diverse range of energy sources so that we're not overexposed to one particular energy source, because that's always will come back to bite you where it hurts at the worst possible moment. Well, I hope that was useful, and I look forward to your thoughts, your calls. Give us a ring, 0344 499 1000. Text us 87222. Tweet us at Talk Radio with your thoughts, your views. We'll be taking some calls after the break. It is 12:18, and this is, of course, Tice Talk at the home of common sense. It's Talk Radio.
Online, on DAB, and on the Talk Radio app. Talk Radio.
Offence archaeology on Twitter. Quite terrifying.
Don't beg Jeff Bezos. Charge him, for God's sake.
Have a day off. Use some common sense.
People can say whatever they want.
This is Talk Radio.
Across the UK, online, on DAB+, and on the Talk Radio app.
This is Talk Radio.
Welcome back to Tice Talk here on Talk Radio. Well, this afternoon we have been talking at the beginning of this hour about the potential of the shale gas industry. We had an expert on talking about the different types of fracking, the different technologies, because there are different ways of doing it. So those who think that it's unsafe, well, actually, we've only tried using one different type of the technology, and with very, very strict thresholds. And essentially, the government bottled it. And the consequences of this is that we are hugely exposed, much more exposed than the likes of America is, because we are now importing, I think, about 50% of our gas needs, whereas literally a decade ago, we were a net exporter of gas. And we've just got some breaking news in as we speak on the energy crisis, and yet another big energy supplier. This one part backed by BP itself, a 24% shareholder. This company, Pure Planet, is essentially the latest casualty. It appears that they're going to stop trading. They've got some 250,000 companies. They were established in 2015, and they've decided that they are not going to be able to continue, and so therefore they have to enter this process called the supplier of last resort, where the customers get transferred to another company. This is unbelievable. This is going on day in, day out, week in, week out. This wild west of energy companies that don't actually generate the energy. They're literally like a marketing device. They're buying and selling it on the markets, and they've got a sort of a website marketing, and they haven't got the right balance sheet, and they're going bust. And it's the customers, ordinary families up and down the country, who are the victims of this. You think you're on a fixed priced energy deal. We heard from, I think it was Mary earlier on, and all of a sudden you're back to a much higher standard variable rate. And meanwhile, as we speak, the business secretary, Kwasi Kwarteng, is going around some of the other broadcasters and essentially just throwing companies and domestic consumers literally to the whims of the market, to the wolves, not caring, just saying, tough, you've got to get on with it, it's your problem, it's not our problem. My view is actually this is a problem that has been completely and utterly created and stimulated by the woeful mismanagement over the last decade by the Conservative governments of our energy policy, and they have left us exposed, they've left us vulnerable to the supplies and the pricing demands of overseas energy prices. We've got Anthony in Leeds to give his thoughts on the state of government. Anthony, are you there?
Yes, I'm there, Richard, yes.
What are your thoughts this afternoon? Thanks for calling.
Yeah, I'm about the state of our country. It's in a right mess. This country hasn't been right since 1979.
It's unbelievable.
It's a great country. Yeah, well, it hasn't. It's been a mess. We shut all mines down. Didn't we all coal mines down? Because people in London and all that wanted shutting all mines. We'll tell them Northerners. Yeah, we'll tell them. I thought lights go out in London when they're all shipping the champagne in London.
And what in particular? What in particular now, Anthony? What in particular is winding you up about the leadership of Boris's government?
Well, his son's off to Spain. How come he can't go to Blackpool or his holiday, or Scarborough, or be the Western Supermare or Southend? It's not long with them places.
Do you accept that? Do you accept that he should have a holiday at all, given the crisis going on?
No, he should stop here. He said he's Winston Churchill. I don't think so. He's more like George Formby than Winston Churchill.
That's for sure. He is no Winston Churchill.
This is a mess in this country, a mess. And they made it a mess in Parliament. Both parties, both of them need to go. We need somebody else.
Well,
that's what we need.
And it's only October, Anthony. And
figure in this country. That's what we want. Somebody like Billy Robert Kennedy figure in this country.
Well,
they made it in a mess.
It certainly is a mess, and it's only October. Anthony, thank you so much for your thoughts. There's Anthony in Leeds. He's not happy with the direction that this government is going. I think I've got Richard in Derbyshire, who's got some thoughts this afternoon on ivermectin and drug treatments. Richard, hello.
Hi, Richard. I just wanted to expand on the censorship around the issue. I know that some of the other callers might have mentioned it, but if you look at the way that ivermectin has been censored by big tech and corporate media, it's exactly the same as the way some other issues have been censored, such as the lab leak theory or the Great Barrington Declaration. And then now it turns out that they were actually not that far from the truth. I mean, I'm not a doctor, and I couldn't say if ivermectin works, but at this point, I will put money on there being something in this. And the fact that big tech and big pharma have got a financial interest in these issues going away for a time, it reeks of exactly the same thing, exactly the same censorship and smearing.
You're so right, Richard, and you quoted some great examples there. The the issue of what was the origin of the virus. Was it from the wet markets, which was what we were originally told? Was it a lab leak? And we weren't even allowed to talk about it then. I mean, it was just like a sort of,
Exactly.
if you did, you were a conspiracy theorist. And then, I was shut down from talking live on air with people, with broadcasters from other channels, other TV channels, literally live, for daring to mention the Great Barrington Declaration. We were being literally censored. And I think there has been a censorship of this existing treatment for other diseases, ivermectin, and it comes back to this point, Richard, that if we don't know something, then surely the right thing to do is to do proper, big, professional clinical trials so that we find out one way or the other. As you said, you're not a doctor, I'm not a doctor, but I want proper trials to be done so that we can get to the truth, the whole truth, and frankly, nothing but the truth.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that the doctor who you had earlier on, I mean, he came across fairly well, but I've seen him on this station at other times, and he's exposed himself as exactly the kind of medical fascist who wants us to be under restrictions for forevermore. So I don't give much credence to him saying he doesn't think that ivermectin works.
Well, I think the point is, in a sense, different doctors will have different views. There are some that don't think it works. There are others that do think it works. And in a sense, it's about listening to those different views and then saying, well, you've got to find the evidence, and you only get the evidence if you've got the trials and that they are done promptly and efficiently. Richard, thank you so much for your thoughts. That's Richard from Derbyshire. He's worried about censorship. We're trying to avoid censorship here on Talk Radio by talking about the big issues. That's why we've been discussing it here this morning on Talk Radio. We're approaching the news. Keep the calls coming in, 0344 499 1000. But for now, you've been listening to Tice Talk here, the home of common sense. It is, of course, the one and only Talk Radio.
Online and on your smart TV. Talk Radio TV News.
Here are your headlines. I'm Sangeeta Kandola. The energy price cap will remain throughout winter, and the government say it's convinced there won't be gas shortages.
Whoever you are, you burned down the wrong gates.
Chris Packham vows to keep fighting for animal rights despite his home being attacked by arsonists. And Tyson Fury keeps his heavyweight title after knocking out Deontay Wilder. The business secretary says the energy price cap will stay in place throughout the winter. Kwasi Kwarteng called the cap the safety net, shielding customers from instant price hikes. Gas prices are at record highs, with several energy companies collapsing. Ofgem has warned households will see significant rises in the spring when the cap is reviewed. The Home Office says a record number of people have tried to cross the Channel from France this year. It comes as the French Interior Minister claimed the UK hasn't paid the money it promised under a bilateral agreement to prevent illegal crossings. But the government says the UK is working effectively with France. A government health advisor has warned people who catch coronavirus and flu at the same time this winter are twice as likely to die. Chief Executive of the UK Health Security Agency, Jenny Harris, says it's the first time COVID and flu are widely circulating simultaneously. Chris Packham has vowed to continue fighting for animal rights despite a suspected arson attack at his home. The wildlife campaigner was home alone when two masked men drove up to his gate and set their vehicle on fire on Friday morning. And Tyson Fury has retained his WBC heavyweight title after defeating Deontay Wilder in Las Vegas, knocking him out in the 11th round. That's your news on Talk Radio TV. More from me in half an hour.
This is Talk Radio.
Across the UK, online, on DAB+, and on the Talk Radio app.
This is Talk Radio.
Welcome back to Tice Talk. It's 12:32. The time has flown by in my show this morning as we've been talking some big issues, some challenging issues, some ethical issues. The ethics of Big Pharma, whether or not to hold trials on this drug, ivermectin, or to focus on the new potential drug that they could make billions of dollars on, this one called Molnupiravir. They really do need to make these drugs easier to speak. We've been talking with Alistair Campbell about the challenges of government, some of his solutions, and that brought us on to the issue of shale gas. Should we frack? Should we use different types of technology in fracking? We had an expert on talking about a different type of fracking technology to the one that has been used. And we've got a tweet from Grenville who said, up here in Blackpool, we have a fracking site that's ready to go. The wells are sunk. The gas has been tested. It's economic to extract, but it was shut down by the environmental people because of fears about earthquakes. And yet we know that actually the truth is that the threshold that was used for judging the any vibrations was down at 0.5. It was just 1/8 of the thresholds that they use in other countries like the US. So, I just feel that, in a sense, the government allowed itself to be completely and utterly hijacked by the environmental lobbyists without properly exploring it, because it's such a critical aspect of our energy issue. Anyway, I'm delighted now. We've got a caller, Lawrence, from Colchester, to give us his thoughts. Lawrence, good afternoon. What are your thoughts?
Good afternoon, Richard. It's an honour to talk to you, my friend.
Great pleasure.
My wife and I are joining your party, so we can hopefully get into a coalition with the Tories, or God willing.
Well, you're very kind, Lawrence. So, what are your thoughts? Thank you for that. On what you've been hearing this morning about energy, with the energy crisis.
Well, it's a total rip-off, isn't it? I mean, it's all under the Tory government. I think it should be brought back into state ownership. That would keep the bills down, wouldn't it?
Well, that's why, essentially, I've been talking about it, and why I mentioned this morning with Alistair Campbell, why actually I think you can get the best of both worlds, a genuine win-win. You get the best of private sector management, part owned by UK pension funds, and part owned by the taxpayers, the consumers, and that way you do indeed, Lawrence, bring the cost down, because at the moment the government have outsourced it all to the private equity groups. Lawrence, thank you so much for those thoughts and for your support. Really do appreciate it. And now I'm delighted to be joined by Tom Clayton here in the studio, charging around like a busy guy this morning. Tom, there's a lot going on, and I've been talking about money having an impact in so many different spheres of our life, but of course a massive impact in football. And goodness me, we've seen big news this week at Newcastle.
Yes, we certainly have, and this is the takeover of Newcastle United by the Saudi-backed PFI fund, which is essentially funded by the Saudi state. There's been a lot of concern that it is essentially tied to the Saudi state, although they've been given assurances to the Premier League that it's not, essentially, that it is a private fund that is going to be funding Newcastle United. But this is something similar to what we saw with Manchester City 15 years ago. They went from a team mid-table in the Premier League. They were okay. They were never anything special, and then all of a sudden they're winning Premier Leagues and League Cups and everything. Yeah, that's
the hope that the Toon fans are obviously hoping for Newcastle.
Yeah, absolutely, and they're hoping that it can be a quick turnaround. Amanda Staveley is the businesswoman who's leading the consortium of the new owners that took over Newcastle for £300 million, I will say, and she says their aim is to win the Premier League within 5 to 10 years.
Wow.
Which sounds like a long time, a decade, but actually, when you think about it, they're building essentially from ground zero. The biggest problem they have is making sure they stay in the Premier League this season, as they are one of the odds-on favourites to be relegated. So it's interesting to see how they're going to turn it around. Obviously, a lot of money to be thrown at it, so we'll see.
And that's the issue. But this is the big question, though, is that obviously, Newcastle fans delighted. They seem to be very keen to see the back of Mike Ashby. But in a sense, putting aside any concerns about human rights in Saudi Arabia, led by the Crown Prince, allegedly involved, potentially might have approved the murder of the journalist Jamal Khashoggi. All of that seems to be put aside. And then we've got, of course, the World Cup just next year in Qatar, and how people are going to feel about that with human rights issues in Qatar. I mean, this subject is not going away. It's just going to bubble around the surface, isn't it?
Yeah, and you use those examples. I also use the examples of Formula One races. You know, we're going to Qatar this year, Saudi Arabia as well. Qatar's just signed a 10-year deal to host a race in Formula One from 2023. It's something that's known as sports washing, where essentially, say the Saudi state or a state from that region will use a sport to use the supporters to defend their, I won't say atrocities, but their issues, shall we say? And I think the thing that we have to say here is you can't. I think you can question the morals potentially of the new owners because of where they come from, but I don't think you can question the morals of Newcastle United fans, because at the end of the day, regardless,
they just want to win.
They just want to win,
which is completely understandable.
Yeah.
And what happened? Because as I understand, the Premier League was expected to approve this in a few months' time, and then suddenly it sort of came out of the blue.
Yeah, and this is what's kind of baffled a few teams as well, and they've called for an emergency meeting with the Premier League to say, why has this happened? We don't know why this has happened. All of a sudden, I remember walking into work on Thursday afternoon saying, right, nice easy day for us, and then all of a sudden it breaks, bang, Newcastle are being taken over, and it's like, hang on a second,
where did that
come from? We were saying just a few weeks ago that this is potentially something that might happen after the World Cup next year, but no, this has happened, and it's been signed and done.
I'm quite sure that the gurus in TalkSport will find out what's really happened, what's really gone on in various boardrooms or meetings or who knows what. And I think you may have some emerging breaking news on the England cricket team.
Yes.
And the Ashes. What's going on? Have you got an exclusive for me?
It's not necessarily an exclusive, but I do have a story for you. They have announced the squad for the Ashes, which they only confirmed a couple of days ago, that they were going to be going ahead, essentially. We didn't know what was going to happen, but actually they have announced it's going ahead. Joss Butler is the headline act, in a sense. We weren't really sure if he was going to get the call, but he has.
Right.
So he comes in as well. Sam Curran's been left out. He's dealing with an injury. Ben Stokes, we know, is taking an indefinite leave from cricket to deal with personal issues his mental health. So understandably, he's been left out as well.
And has anybody essentially decided for family reasons that they're not going? Or is anybody who essentially was selected is going?
We think that the only person in that situation is Ben Stokes.
Right.
We don't know anyone in particular who's been left out for that reason.
Because there was the issue of the families having to quarantine when they got to Australia.
Yeah, absolutely. And England players will have to quarantine when they get there. They've been told 14 days in a hotel. They will be allowed out to practice, because otherwise that's 14 days without practice before one of the most famous series in cricket, of course. So who knows with that? But no, I think there's no one in particular who stands out. No one who says, I'm not going unless my family can't come. There was a lot of talk about it, but I think now that they're saying that they can come back for a couple of weeks after the Men's T20 World Cup, which starts in a couple of weeks' time, I think it's less of an issue. But we're just kind of glad to see that this is going ahead on certain conditions, of course, and those conditions are being met at the moment.
Absolutely. And just before we finish, Tyson Fury, the big fight last night.
Yeah.
I didn't watch it, but wow.
Yeah, absolutely. And it was just starting as I was walking into work at 5 o'clock this morning. So tells you how long I've been here for and how ready I am to go home. But no, really entertaining fight, actually. We were kind of expecting a 1-2 blow-in match to be done within 3 rounds. But Deontay Wilder kept going where he had no right to keep going. He was, overweight by his standards, and he was not really in a good position, but he knocked Tyson Fury down twice in a single round, and we thought, hang on a second, is this fight on its head? But then Tyson Fury comes back, does a Tyson Fury thing, knocks Deontay Wilder out in the 11th round, later than we all expected, and game, set, and match. The judges were scoring it in favour of Tyson Fury anyway, so had it gone the distance, Fury would most likely have won.
Fantastic. Well, thank you so much, Tom, for those thoughts on the issue of Newcastle United and on the Ashes. And it sounds like you've been up for a long time. You need to go and have a good lunch.
Thank you.
It feels like supper.
I'm looking forward to it.
That's Tom Clayton from TalkSport with his views on the latest sports news. Thank you very much for that. Well, give us a call. We've got coming up to the last quarter of an hour of the show, 0344 499 1000. Tweet us with your thoughts, your views on everything we've been discussed, or anything that we haven't discussed that you think we should be discussing. For now, you're listening to Tice Talk. It's 11:42. It's Talk Radio.
Online, on DAB, and on the Talk Radio app. Talk Radio.
Offence archaeology on Twitter. Quite terrifying.
Don't beg Jeff Bezos. Charge him, for God's sake.
Have a day off. Use some common sense.
People can say whatever they want.
This is Talk Radio.
Across the UK, online, on DAB+, and on the Talk Radio app.
This is Talk Radio.
Welcome back to Tice Talk here on Talk Radio. We're approaching the last part of my show. We've got some breaking news here. The Home Office wasted millions of pounds on an asylum camp that was never used. This is from The Independent. It appears the government ministers are accused of reckless spending after it emerged that more than £3 million of taxpayers' money was invested through a construction firm to build porta cabins on the site of an asylum centre and then never used. It was decided it was inappropriate. More wasteful spending from the government. We've got tweets coming in here. We've got Shellow saying, as with anything in this country's politics and government and also pharma, hashtag follow the money. That's interesting. Paul, he says 2 points about the government and fracking. Boris does what Carrie says. And how much dark money may have funded the Green protests against fracking and where did it come from? That was from Paul. Who knows is the answer. But you can see people's thoughts. Another one here also, that Boris Johnson, because of Carrie's views, will never ever allow fracking. End of the story. Just think it's extraordinary how the shale gas industry that was in a Conservative manifesto was literally shut down because of essentially intense lobbying from Friends of the Earth, environmentalists, others that I call sort of the eco-bullies, despite the strategic importance of being self-reliant as a nation with our own energy. We've got Amanda in East Sussex on the line with some thoughts. Good afternoon, Amanda. How can I help you? What are your thoughts?
Good morning, Richard. Nice to speak to you again. Well, first of all, let me quickly just say that I feel that we don't really have Boris as a Prime Minister. We have Carrie, his wife. I don't think that Boris is really making most of the decisions anymore. So that's just one subject. But going on to the censorship that surrounds, the vaccines and the pandemic and everything else, I just find it really concerning that we spend every single day now having to read or listen to articles and reports about these vaccines. I think many people in this country have got absolute vaccine fatigue. And I would really like to know, when are we ever going to be able to get our lives back to normal? And I mean the old normal, not this new weird normal that we're all living in.
I couldn't agree more, Amanda. I mean, there's no question that, not only do we have to learn to live with it, and actually I think we are now, we're making progress in learning to live with it. But I'm with you. We all want the old normal back, all our freedoms, all our civil liberties. And which is one of the reasons, Amanda, why actually, I want to talk about the treatments, not just the vaccine, because that's about building confidence. If there's a wider range of treatments, and of course, look, we want the scientists and the pharma companies, to come up with new ways to resolve illnesses and issues. But if we've got more confidence that there are more treatments out there, then actually, as you say, that reduces the pressure and the fatigue on discussing vaccines and whether we boost or don't boost, who do we jab and who do we don't jab. It's really important, and that gives us the confidence, the belief to push on with our lives again as we used to.
Exactly. Well, you'll be interested to know that there's just been a really very interesting study that's just come out of Columbia University over in the States, and they've actually said that now they've discovered people that have had COVID before, the memory cells in the lungs actually store the information from the people that have had COVID. They store in the memory cells of the lungs to prevent reinfection. So natural immunity from COVID is far, far stronger and better for someone than to take the vaccine, because the information that the body needs to fight reinfection of COVID is stored in the memory cells of the lungs, and that's been discovered by a study that's come out of Columbia University. So therefore, it's actually dangerous to vaccinate people that have already had COVID, which is what they're pushing people to do. They're still telling people you should take the vaccine even if you've had COVID.
Correct. I don't think we say that it's... I mean, I'm not a doctor, but I don't think we're saying it's dangerous if you've been vaccinated. But there's no question that many, many doctors do agree, and I think that study you've referred to also agrees that actually a natural immunity is the strongest, the longest lasting immunity that there is. Thank you, Amanda. I'm going to have to...
They want to censor it.
Well, that's the issue. Thank you so much, Amanda, for your thoughts. Censorship is a really big issue, and that's why we've been trying to talk about some of these difficult issues that other broadcasters, other media groups won't talk about, because we live in a democracy. We live in, we should be living in, the world of free speech, where we can talk about these things. And it's interesting, just hearing Amanda there. One thing that hasn't really come out, but I've just learned about literally in the last 24 hours. Obviously, we had the issue of the JCVI that couldn't support vaccinating children between the ages of 12 and 15. And essentially, the chief medical officers, they came up with a different view. And then the health secretary approved the vaccinating of 12 to 15-year-olds. Well, it looks like parents are voting with their feet, because as we speak, a number of weeks later, the latest data I've seen is that only 11.5% of 12 to 15-year-olds in England have been vaccinated, which tells you a story. Meanwhile, on Twitter, I mentioned the news about Pure Planet having essentially to stop trading, backed by BP, and we've had a tweet in here from Charlie, who says that he's worried. He's a retired veteran with not a lot of money. His supplier is, unfortunately, Pure Planet. What on earth will I do if I get placed with a supplier charging the earth for energy under a new variable contract? And this is the issue, isn't it? This is the concern, that it is now millions of people are having their finances massively disrupted, put at risk by this Wild West in the energy market that is literally coming apart at the seams. And we've got a business secretary who just says, well, that's tough. It's the market, nothing to do with me, Gov. I don't think that's acceptable. I really, really don't. And we're not even near winter yet. Anyway, I hope you've been enjoying the show. We've been discussing some big issues, and I'm delighted now that to sort of take us towards some easier issues, some more less challenging issues perhaps. We're joined none other than by the wonderful Bob Mills. Did you miss me last week?
I did, Richard. How was your conference? Did it go well?
The conference went well, and it was my first outside broadcast, which is always, a little bit nervous, a bit more worried about the tech.
It's good because you're in a room just talking to no one.
Exactly.
Now, you made me smile just before I came in, and you reminded me of my dad. So thank you for that, because you used a lovely phrase when you said to your last guest, I'm not a doctor, but my dad used to spend his life saying that was a phrase he would say, well, I'm not a doctor. And my mum used to say, no one thinks you are. I remember him saying something, what did he say? Listen, I'm not a structural engineer, but it looks... Nobody thinks you are. You don't have to tell people what you're not.
Well, we're always constantly saying it in order to essentially to protect ourselves.
Well, otherwise, protect myself in case of legals. I'm not a doctor.
Otherwise, we'll have someone shouting at us from somewhere on high, or the regulators, the lawyers, the Ofcom, whatever. Who knows? Anyway, how are you doing?
I'm going very, very well.
Good.
Things are looking nice. You see, this is a lovely show. This is why my show is such a joy, because you've done all the heavy lifting.
And now we have done some heavy lifting this morning.
Yes,
we really have.
All of it. And now I'm saying to people, have a cup of tea, have a ginger nut.
And lunch.
Yeah, have a French fancy, have anything you want, because there's no pressure for the next 3 hours. I promise you, nothing's going to upset you. Nothing's going to... But it's good. The wireless should upset people.
Yes.
That's what makes it better than television.
Absolutely. And we have been upsetting people this morning. I had a lot of complaints about, because I had Alistair Campbell on. Tony Blair.
Never done a day's work in his life.
Well, there we are. Anyway, that upset a few, but actually there were some listeners who really appreciated it.
Yes, of course they do. But that is the glory of good radio.
Exactly.
It can annoy you. It can make you so angry, and then the next minute it can just say, "Oh, I agree with that."
Ease it up. That's right.
There
and that's
you
why
go.
actually it's right to discuss.
We've got Nina Conti, the ventriloquist. We've got Trisha Tuttle, director of the BFI. London Film Festival's back.
Fantastic.
People are going to go in cinemas and watch films.
Oh, amazing.
And, I don't know how old you are, do you remember Scaffold? The Scaffold?
No.
Well, one of the members of the Scaffold was Mike Mbe, as he was called. He is, in fact, Mike McCartney.
Yes,
who didn't use the name because he didn't want to be trading off his older his
yeah.
brother. But he's on the show, Mike McCartney, talking about the early days of the Liverpool scene. And he's published a beautiful book of old photographs of the Liverpool scene. So that'll be good. And then we've got an art review. Nicola Morby, lecturer of the Art Society.
And talking of films, have you seen the new Bond film?
I haven't seen it yet, no.
Nor have I. I've got to see it.
I'm going to see it, funnily enough. I've moved into a new house and we're not all linked up with everything. We have to rely on what the television sends us.
Oh, I want to go to the big screen. I want to sort of enjoy it in the big screen. I mean,
Daniel's a fellow Sestrian. I'm a Sestrian, as indeed is Daniel Craig. So I feel a great affinity.
Yeah. Well, I think I've got just a funny feeling that he might be tempted to do another. I don't know. There's a bit of chat.
Hang on a minute. Is that a funny feeling, or are you in the know?
No, I know. I'm not in the know.
You've had a chat with someone at
conference,
haven't you?
It's just a funny feeling. Well, look, Bob, I know you're going to have a great show, and we've had a busy 3 hours. Thank you very much, everybody, for listening, for watching, for calling, tweets. It really has. We haven't held back. We've had some breaking news. We've been talking about the sport, and of course, the big ethical decision really got people going about whether Merck was right or not right not to conduct trials about their own drug, ivermectin. That really has got people going. And my clear view is there's still so much uncertainty out there. We need more treatment. We need better information. And really, they should have done some trials on that. We had the views of Alistair Campbell. That upset people. But there we are. Thanks to my wonderful production team.